Hi everybody, my name is Hannah, this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this video series where we are exploring grade 4 from the Waldorf inspired approach. You can find all of the videos down in the description box below, and you can find more information on my website at the blog post that accompanies this video. We're going to dive in and I'm going to share with you a little bit of the Waldorf curriculum for grade 4. There is an extensive review for this curriculum, but I want to share with you some of the main lesson blocks that are in grade 4 so that you can see how you can include other books and resources for each of these main lesson blocks, or dispense with the curriculum entirely and try to create your own. But after I show you everything to create your own, you might just consider getting the curriculum because it's pretty extensive. So the grade 4 curriculum comes with several main lesson blocks. I've added the grade and a little color on the side just because we own the entire set. So this just helps me keep it organized. There are 3 here that don't have anything because they're brand new, because when I went to record the video, I was missing these 3 main lesson blocks. We're going to dive into the live education Waldorf curriculum, and I'm going to share with you some of the books and resources that I have collected that can complement the main lesson blocks. Or if you would like to do something completely on your own, I think some of these books and resources might help you achieve that. So the 4th grade curriculum comes with several main lesson books, and you can find a complete review of this entire curriculum. That link is down in the description box below. So I'm not going to spend too much time going over each of these books. I am going to go over the first one, the introduction to the 4th year, because it is so important. And this is really going to explain to you how to do a main lesson block, how to do a main lesson, what's going on with your 4th year child. So around the age of 10. So just at the tail end of the 9-year change and just kind of coming into him or herself. And it's going to go over the additional books and resources that you can use for each of these blocks. And I have more than what's recommended, so I encourage you to choose the ones that are going to best suit your family. I also want to point out that throughout this series, I'm going to be sharing a lot of things that aren't necessarily Waldorf. They are things that we have used. We do use a lot of picture books because I do enjoy them. But first, I want to go over this first main lesson block. This is actually an overview of the whole school year, the student, and how to approach the main lesson blocks and the main lessons. This is such an important resource for the parent, especially if you're less aware of the developmental changes that are happening with your child, or if you're not that familiar with the Waldorf approach. This book is really going to help you understand the arc of the school year, how to do your main lesson, because it's very different from a typical lesson in a typical school setting. And it's going to go over, one of my favorite parts is that it's going to go over the development of your child. And this is so important to understand because the lessons and the stories that are being offered for this year specifically support that development of your child going through these changes. So the 10-year-old child, roughly grade 4, should be at the tail end of the 9-year change, or have completely finished the 9-year change, or is in some part of the process of finishing up the 9-year change. And the 9-year change is quite an upheaval developmental change that occurs that's between 2 very unique and pivotal developmental changes in a child's life. And that's the 7-year change, and then 14, 13, 12, the puberty change. So those 2 are at the beginning and at the end of the majority of the time that you're going to be spending home educating or educating your child. Beyond that, they're going to be in higher education, and some families still choose to homeschool high school with a Waldorf approach. And prior to age 7, a lot of times you're not doing formal education. At least that's my opinion, and also the opinion of the Waldorf philosophy. You're doing more of a play-based approach and less of a formal education approach. So between 7 and 14, you have, like, almost towards the middle, sort of beginning middle, you have this huge change, and that's the 9-year change. It's a time when children are in a bit of an upheaval. It's where finally time starts to move very rapidly. Before that, time seemed to just stretch on forever. It's a time when children can understand having a past and a present, because prior to this, they lived without the boundaries of time. And certainly you could speak to them about things in the past or in the future, and they may mimic back to you, but the deep understanding doesn't occur until about 9 years of age. And this is a time where prior to this, tomorrow might be any time tomorrow would be called tomorrow versus next week or next month. It would all just be sometime in the future, and anything in the past might have just been yesterday, but the concept of something that could have passed like a month or a year prior wasn't fully formed for that child. So now at 10, they have hopefully completed that 9-year change. Now time suddenly has presence, and it seems like it's speeding up. And the idea of the child's inner world, which was their entire being, was just themselves in the world, was all just one. Now there's this idea of the outside world and themselves, and where do they fit in the outside world? And it's a bit of a harsh awakening in a way. And so the curriculum is going to help support that change, especially in the stories that you'll find in the animal and man block. You can find other aspects of the math curriculum and the handwork curriculum that really support this developmental change. And if you want more information about the details of this change, you're going to find them in this book, as well as other Waldorf resources that talk about these different stages of development. In addition to the development of the child, you're going to find ideas for the whole main lesson block approach. So a main lesson block is a concentration of a particular subject area that's very purposefully chosen for each of these different grade levels. And they roughly are about 3 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. They're not much longer than that. They're usually not shorter than that either. If they're going to be longer, then it's advised that you split them up into 2 shorter main lesson blocks that you separate between other main lesson blocks. Now, this book has a suggestion on which main lesson blocks to do and which order to do them in. This is either part of the Waldorf approach, or it's something that this curriculum has chosen to do. I follow a little bit of a different approach when it comes to organizing my year and my main lesson blocks. I tend to start with the new, more head-oriented learning, the new learning for the year in the fall, when children, in my opinion, are more fresh for learning. They're excited to be back in school. They're coming off of the high of summer, and they haven't gotten worn out from their daily grind of school. And not that every child is going to feel that way, but I sort of feel like there's this energy at the beginning of the year that I really want to capture. So I tend to do our math main lesson blocks in the fall, when there's a lot of new learning that my children can then practice throughout the year. So I like to introduce the new learning at the beginning of the year for math, and for the grade 4 student, that will be fractions, so that they have the entire year to really work on it. Now, this works in many cases, but if you have a child that might be a little bit behind his or her peers, or maybe isn't quite ready for a math concept that's going to require quite a bit of development and maybe life experience and practice, you might end up choosing to do that math main lesson block towards the end of the year, when that child has a little bit more time to develop. I also like to do my new grammar learning in the fall as well, and that again gives them time to practice those new concepts throughout the year, and especially with grammar and spelling, since the grade 4 student is going to do a lot more reading and writing and narrations. It's good for them to have some of those skills learned at the beginning of the year, because they're going to be using them throughout the year. There's going to be a lot more writing for the 4th grade student than before, and they'll continue doing a lot more writing. But in grade 1, when they're just learning the letters and maybe short words, they might be doing very simple sentences, very simple words. And again, in grade 2, I feel grade 2 is an extension of grade 1 when it comes to grammar and spelling and writing. Grade 3, you'll see students composing their own sentences, maybe doing copy work and dictation. By grade 4, those sentences are going to turn into paragraphs, and each child is unique, and you know your child best, whether they're ready for that a little bit sooner or a little bit later. My children tended to be a little bit behind even the Waldorf approach, which tends to be about a year behind traditional school. At least that's the way I do it. I start our formal lessons at age 7 for grade 1. Rather than grade 6. So my students were typically a little bit behind even the Waldorf approach. It tends to work out in the end, barring any learning challenges or disabilities. But by the time students are getting into grade 4 and 5, they're probably putting together several sentences to make a paragraph. They need to know the grammar and punctuation rules. They need to work on their spelling and vocabulary and general sentence structure and grammar. And so I prefer to do grammar and math at the beginning of the school year so that they can continue to practice that throughout the year. I like to do my history in the winter. I find this to be a really great time to focus on storytelling and just the idea of cozying up. We live in Southern California. There's not much cozying up, but cozying up next to the fire with a good book and reading those stories and doing our history generally in the winter time seems to really work for us. And then in the spring, we like to do our science. And if our year has gotten delayed, as it normally does, because we end up taking longer than we expect and we can't get through all of our sciences in the spring, we will just bump them over into the fall of the next year. And so sometimes we start off the school year with a science and a math. Now, I didn't come up with this idea. I actually learned it from another homeschooler many years ago who worked with the seasons with her lessons, and I loved the idea. And so I incorporated that into our main lesson block approach. So this is going to have a sample of what kind of main lesson blocks can coordinate and which one should follow the other, and then it tells you how long they should last as well. The main lesson is also quite unique in a Waldorf setting. The main lesson can be an hour and a half, 2 hours, or even 2.5 hours long, but you're doing quite a few things in that time. So you're going to start off your main lesson with some opening activities, and the opening activities that we would do in our homeschool involved games or mental math or active math, and I will show you some of the games and the math that we did in each of those videos that coordinate with that subject area. And sometimes we would read a picture book, or you could do poetry in that time. If you are doing a musical instrument, you can practice that musical instrument. If you are working on some poetry, you might be memorizing that poetry. You can use the opening activities time to do that as well. And if you're doing religious studies, any kind of memorization, you might include that in your opening activities as well. So you can see that an opening activities period of time could take a half an hour. I mean, honestly, sometimes for us, it took a full hour before we actually got to our main lesson. And that's good and bad. It's good because you're doing lots of little things in that time. So the children usually don't have mental fatigue. The bad thing is that by the time you're ready to actually engage in a main lesson, children sometimes are done. So be aware of your child's energy level as you're doing your opening activities, and also be aware of children wanting to do the opening activity more than the main lesson, because I noticed that my children would get so engaged in playing the games and realize that if we just played the games for an hour and a half, there would just be no time for our main lesson. And it was still learning, but not on task for what we had intended. So that is this book. You're going to find a lot of these tips on how to put together your main lesson block, and the development of the child. For the main lesson itself, when you have completed doing your opening activities, then you'll get into the actual main lesson. And the main lesson itself has a couple of different aspects. It has a review, has a lesson presentation, a lesson activity. And for me, usually these things would be spanned over 3 days. And the way that would look like for me is if you just take a lesson itself, you have the presentation of the lesson, you have the lesson activity, which for me would include writing and drawing, and so that's where the 2 days would come in. It could also include an activity that's more hands-on, and when we would do those hands-on activities, usually for me that would span an entire week, and that would be part of our main lesson, but also separate from the main lesson presentation and activity. And then you have your review work, and the review work is really important. And often I would overlook this just to get into the meat of the lesson, but the review work is an opportunity for a student to orally narrate back to you what the previous lesson was about. And this is really important in moving into the written portion of the lesson, because when you orally narrate back, you can see where your child understood something, where they maybe didn't understand something. Maybe there was really big holes in the storytelling, and we're not looking for completion in their narration. We're just looking for what they actually responded to, remembered, and are articulating back to you. The way that looks like in an actual presentation of your week is that on the first day, since there aren't any previous lessons, you're presenting your first lesson. And in that day, you might spend some time in your main lesson book. So I have a few main lesson books here to share with you. I would still be using these large 9-inch by 12-inch main lesson books. These ones have these really beautiful, sturdy covers, and then blank pages on the inside, blank on both sides with onion skin in the middle. And so on the first day of your main lesson block, you might take that time to decorate your front cover for that main lesson block. So if it's man and animal, you might be writing the title, you might draw a scene. If it was for fractions, you might decorate your page with numbers. And so this will be the first activity that you're doing on the first day, because there isn't review work, there isn't lesson work, there isn't a lesson activity necessarily. There could be, you could start on a project. There are main lesson books that are presented in the landscape orientation, and I still like this for grade 4, but I especially like it for grade 2 and 3, especially when children are still learning how to write and are writing quite with large letters. That working in this orientation gives them a little bit more space to finish words. If it was shorter, they would constantly be going to the next line if their words were quite big. But for 4th grade, this is still an option. In my homeschool, we did both, and it just sort of depended on what we had on hand and what we were planning to draw. By the time they get into 5th grade, I prefer the portrait orientation because that mimics a notebook a little bit more. And so that's the one that we use the most. You also have some smaller ones. These are slightly smaller. They're from a different retailer, and the pages are a little bit different. They're not quite as thick. There is no onion skin between them, and the front and back covers are a little bit thinner as well, more of like a shiny, smooth texture, versus this one is thicker and a little bit textured. And then you could use this for 4th grade, but I would honestly recommend this for 5th or 6th grade. These are the notebooks that have 2 pages of lined pages and then 1 page that's blank. So it's blank on both sides, and then you have onion skin, and then again 2 pages of lined pages. So if you really wanted to use this for 4th grade, you certainly could, but I would recommend using it for 5th or 6th grade. So on that first day of your main lesson, you will be working on your main lesson book to prepare it for the coming lessons. Now, typically in a main lesson book, you will find multiple subjects, or if you were in a classroom, you'll find multiple subjects in the main lesson book. In the homeschool setting, I prefer to do one main lesson book for every subject area. If you were in a school, they might have just loose pages that would all be collected, you know, weekly or monthly into one main lesson book, and at the end of the year separated out into each of their own main lesson books. So you can have just one main lesson book that just goes day by day, week by week, month by month, with all your new main lessons in there, because your main lesson book is going to be a collection of your, in a way, your finest work, or your final work, or the work that you really worked on and mastered and perfected. That's going to go into your main lesson book. You can have lots of spare sheets of paper to practice, to do your rough drafts, to work on math problems, but this will be kind of like your best work. So when you are doing your first, or let's say your second lesson, so your second lesson now, you've done your opening activities, which are always at the beginning because they're opening activities. Once you do those, then you'll begin on your review. So your review generally comes before your new lesson and your new lesson work. The review for me generally is oral, or in some cases, it can be the written rough draft of what's going to go into our main lesson. Then you can do your lesson activity or lesson work. But on the second day, you may not have that much work to do since it's only the second day of a 3-day learning period. And you can do this as a 2-day learning period and start your work on the second day of at the beginning of a main lesson block. I tended to wait a little bit longer, but that was just my approach. And then at the very end of the lesson, that's when you present your new lesson. So your new lesson always comes at the end for most subjects. For math, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes the new lesson came at a different time in the lesson presentation. But for many of our lessons, the new learning came at the end of all the work that we did. So by the third day, again, opening activities, your review work, then you can start on some kind of lesson activity, either the written portion, the narration of your main lesson, or you can start on your drawing that day, because for many of our lessons, we did include illustrations. And for your illustrations, you can consider using a couple of different art mediums. So I have the thicker Lyra pencils, color pencils here, and these worked really well for us. They still work well for us even in the upper grades. You can also have the smaller Lyra color pencils, which I don't recommend for grade 4 necessarily, but they are available if you are looking just to get one set for many of your children rather than something specific for each child, because these products are quite expensive. Then you could certainly use this, but if you're going to use these kind of color pencils, I find them to be a little bit more challenging to use on a larger format main lesson book. I find them a little bit easier on a smaller format main lesson book, just because otherwise you're drawing so much with just a really tiny tip and it just takes a little bit of time. But if my child was in grade 4, I probably would still be using the block and stick crayons. And these are really great because you can get your drawing done, in my opinion, in a faster period of time. And you still get a fair amount of detail, but in grade 4, you're not needing as much detail as you're going to need in, say, grade 5, when you're working on your botany, and you need a little bit more of a fine tool in order to get the detailed work for the scientific illustrations that you're going to be doing. You can certainly still do a very beautiful watercolor or use your block crayons, but I found that for us, we were doing more detailed work by the time we got to 5th grade, even if we were doing it in watercolors. But these are still a great choice for 4th grade, and we use them often up until 4th grade. And honestly, you can use them beyond, but it's a little bit easier to use those when you're working in your main lesson book, because you can easily get your drawing done without too much time investment, and you're getting a general look rather than a detailed look, because we're still in the end of an imaginative phase in the child's development. So the drawing would be part of your main lesson in many of the subjects, and then you end with the new presentation, the new lesson for that day. So this is the main lesson block approach, and you will do this until the main lesson block is done. And then you will start on your next main lesson block. One resource that will really help you with your drawing and painting throughout the grades, this is for grade 1 through 8, is called Painting and Drawing in Waldorf Schools. This is a tremendous resource. If you are just starting out your journey, I highly recommend you invest in this book. If you head to the grade 4 illustrations and paintings, you can see that the illustrations are quite large. They don't have a ton of detail, especially when it comes to the watercolors. Now for the watercolors, you're probably still going to be using your Stockmar watercolors. These come in these small containers. They are highly concentrated, so you do mix them with water, and then you can use them this way. You don't want to leave them in here for too long because they will start to smell. You can store them in the refrigerator for a period of time to preserve them. Otherwise, I would only just mix enough that you need for the week or 2 weeks at a time. That way you're not wasting your watercolors. And you do want to water them down because these are very concentrated. And then for your paintbrushes, you might be still using your wide paintbrush that was in grade 1, maybe in kindergarten as well. But you can also move to some more like smaller paintbrushes to get some of this additional detailed work. So you can see that the crayons are used here. These are some samples for the Norse mythology main lesson block. And then for the animals and man main lesson block, and you can see the watercolors here as well. So this will end up being a really wonderful resource for you, especially if you're not artistically inclined. This is going to help you along the way teaching your children. This isn't a book to hand to the child so that they can copy these illustrations. This is for you as a teacher, as your own resource in learning how to do these drawings with your children. Now, in the Waldorf curriculum, there is a main lesson block on drawing simple animal forms, and this will also give you some assistance in learning how to draw these different animal forms, since this is a block. The animal study is a block in year 4. I have a couple of resources that might help you understand the Waldorf philosophy and child development a little bit more. I have Children and Their Temperaments, and this is a really great way to understand what you might consider the personality traits of a child, but the temperaments are categorized a little bit differently. And what's really amazing about this that you're not going to maybe be able to utilize as much in a homeschool setting is that in a school setting, when you have 20 to 30 students in a classroom, you have enough variation in the temperaments, enough of the same temperament, so to speak, that they can be grouped together in the classroom so that the parts of the temperament that need to be polished a little bit are best done with another student of that same temperament. So the teacher will generally place those students together so that those aspects can be visualized in someone else, can be observed in someone else, so that there is some recognition that they are that way too, so that those traits can be softened in a sense. So in a homeschool setting, you're not going to have that same opportunity because you have fewer students, let's say, or children within a school setting. So you're not going to have that same opportunity, but understanding the temperaments is really insightful in how you prepare your lessons, for instance, because each of the temperaments, they have a different affinity for different aspects of a story. So there are those children who have a temperament, and I cannot remember which temperament goes towards which one of these characteristics. But for instance, you'll have children, when they are listening to a story or reading a story, are very invested in the details of the food or the decorations or those aspects of the story. Whereas you'll have other students that are very invested in the emotional aspect between the characters or in the heroic adventures of the characters. So you have these different parts of a story that appeal to different temperaments, and knowing your child's temperament and understanding the connection in what they are responding to in a story means that you can include those aspects into your story if you are storytelling, so that you can draw in those students. That's just one aspect to the temperaments that might help you understand your child and their motivations and how you can utilize that in your education. So Rudolf Steiner, The Education of the Child, these are the early lectures on education. This is a book that I went through pretty extensively when we were first exploring Waldorf education. And it really gave me a good sense of the whole picture and what the child was going through and the kinds of lessons that would be appropriate for that child. But it's not a curriculum, and it wasn't the practical information that I needed. It was really great in understanding my child or understanding children and their development, but you will still need more than this. But I found this to be a really great background resource when exploring the curriculum later on, because then you have an understanding of why lessons are being taught, when they're being taught, and how they're being presented, and what stories are being presented. This will give you a lot of that background information. There are other books in this series as well. I think Kingdom of Childhood is the one with the pink cover. I have that one as well, and I cannot find it. And that was filled with notes as well. I might have lent it out and never had gotten it back. So I'm kind of sad about that, because I do tend to write in my books pretty extensively. And then I love reading other people's notes as well. However, there are even more books than these two that can help you understand the Waldorf philosophy in respect to teaching specifically. And while we are mostly I'm assuming homeschoolers, I think the teachers and parents can learn a lot from understanding what is happening with your child, because the stories and the lessons and the presentation of that information is so beautifully aligned with the child that you are, in a way, I feel, utilizing your time the best with the things that are going to be received in an appropriate time, received the best for that time. And that means you're not wasting your time on education and information that's going to be need to be revisited at some point in the future because it wasn't that opportunity for that child in that moment. Understanding Waldorf Education, Teaching from the Inside Out. This is a book that I've recommended so much because I feel like it is a great overview of Waldorf education. So if you're brand new to Waldorf, or you've been doing it for a while but you want to explain to someone else, or someone's interested in it, I feel like this is a really great basic overview. I have to admit that it's been years since I've read this because we've been homeschooling for so long. I have recommended it over the years. It is a fast, easy read, and it breaks it down in a very simple way so that you get a good sense of what's happening in Waldorf education. And since these lessons and these videos that I'm sharing with you regarding 4th grade is specifically Waldorf inspired, I think this will be a really great overview of what the philosophy has in store for you. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series of videos where we are exploring grade 4. I'm sharing with you some of the books and resources you can use to complement a Waldorf inspired curriculum, or some things that you might choose to do outside of the curriculum. So today we're going to be covering some grammar and reading resources. But first I want to share with you the curriculum that we are using. This is by Live Education. This is for grade 4. It comes with several main lesson books, and today we're going to be focused on grammar. So while the grammar main lesson block has everything you're going to need for your year, I do have a number of resources that you can use to help supplement your year, or things that you can use in order to do your own main lesson work. Okay, there are 2 books that I specifically have that are for the Waldorf school or Waldorf student, and then the rest of them are grammar books. So let's go over these ones first. The Waldorf Student Reading List. This is going to be a resource for books that are suggested for each of the grade levels. And some of the books that are suggested are going to complement the main lesson blocks that are already being taught for that year. So if you were looking for some reading resources, either to read aloud or for your child to read, depending on their reading level, this would be a great resource for you. We have Spelling by Hand, Teaching Spelling in a Waldorf School. And so these are some tips on how you can teach spelling in a Waldorf school. Now, I have to just admit right off the top, I am a terrible speller, and I've learned a lot more about spelling by teaching my children. I think I fell through the cracks when it came to my education, changing schools when I was young, as well as a change in whether they were doing phonics or sight words. So I have never had a strong I was never strong at spelling, and subsequently my children have struggled with it as well because I did not value it as much as I should have. So I do appreciate curricula that help the student have a better grasp at spelling, because sometimes it can be quite challenging in languages where multiple letters can be used for words, various spellings, or a letter is sounding different depending on the word. Now, there's one thing that I don't necessarily agree with in this book, and I wanted to point it out because I crossed it out, and you may have the same feeling as the book, or you may have a different feeling, but I wanted to share with you something that this book suggests for the student. So when you are writing, and this says for grade 4, 5, 6, and 7. So the 4th grade student, in my opinion, is now really starting to blossom when it comes to writing and reading, but especially writing, because prior to this in grade 3, the student was probably just starting to form their own sentences and maybe doing a few sentences together for a main lesson entry. Prior to that, the student might be forming one sentence with very simple words that were pretty easy to sound out. But by grade 4, we're looking at more vocabulary words, more spelling words, different letter combinations and for sounds. And this is a great opportunity to do your grammar and spelling work, in my opinion, earlier in the year so that they have more resources at their hands when they are beginning to write in their main lesson books for their narrations, which are almost a daily occurrence. And one suggestion that's in this book is that so children are not going to know how to spell everything at this age. So one suggestion the book has is that when you're writing your narration, and a lot of times personally, we would write our narrations, our practice narrations, our rough draft on a separate piece of paper before including it into a main lesson book. And if you want more information on the main lesson books and their types and what's available and their sizes, that's all in the first video of this series. And you can find that link down in the description box below, as well as the links for all of the other videos in this series. So one suggestion is that the student write down the word or write down their entire lesson, narration, sentences, and then to self-correct first. And if they think that a word is spelled wrong, to underline it and then write down 3 guesses at how you might spell the word. Now, I understand that if you're learning, say, the sound for which could be ER or UR or IR, and you write the word bird and you're not sure if you spell it BIR or BUR or BER, bird, you might include a couple of variations because they all make the same sound. I would discourage that personally because once a child writes down something incorrectly, it's much more difficult to erase it from their mind. And I think this is, I got this maybe from Charlotte Mason philosophy. And so I would not encourage guessing. If your child didn't know, I would not encourage that child to write down the word. I would offer the answer. I would teach a child how to use a dictionary, which is really hard at this age, to be honest, at grade 4. And I would do something else, which is probably a little bit controversial when it comes to Waldorf education. I would utilize technology. This is, for me, a really great opportunity to not inhibit the creative and learning process because you don't know how to spell a word. You want to get that word down very quickly so that you can continue. Because for me, spelling, and take it with a grain of salt since I am a terrible speller, but I would rather get to the content, the creativity, and the work without the hindrance of not knowing how to spell a word. So I want to get that word as quickly as possible. So give your child the spelling, make it easy for them to look up that word so that that's not a hindrance. And the more they see it correctly, hopefully, the better it will be in their mind. The second you write it incorrectly, the more you have to work at getting that out of their mind. So I just want to point that out. That's just a personal opinion, but this is going to give you suggestions for multiple grades. So this is a great resource that you can have from the beginning of your homeschool through middle school. It's a very small book, so it's one of many resources that I would suggest, and I'm about to share with you a lot of grammar resources that are maybe too many grammar resources. So you do not need all of these. You only need one. Actually, this is not a grammar resource necessarily. This is more for the student to use. All of these are for you to use as the teacher, as the parent, as resources. You certainly can draw from these resources to create additional main lesson work, but these are not for the student. I'm going to start with the first one, which is the most recent addition to our homeschool library. And to be honest, I cannot remember where we got it from. But this one's called Actually the Comma Goes Here. And this, like many of the books I'm going to show you, are going to go over the biggest topics in grammar. This one's nice and small, so hopefully easy to use, but to be honest, we haven't used this one yet, but there are other ones that I have used that we really love. The reason why I want to show this one to you is that I think it's a more recent publication, because this one, for instance, is so old. The only reason why I'm showing it to you is because I love it so much and I have used it literally for almost 30 years. So that's why it's here, because I found it to be very helpful. But this is a little bit of a smaller, compact approach. I have other books that are a little bit more lengthy and detailed. Pocket Style Manual, this is going to go over the general grammar, very easy to use, very easy to flip through, very easy to find the topic of area that you need. This is a great resource for an older student. Actually, all of these grammar books are great resources for upper elementary and into middle school and high school, definitely. And of course, into college, many of these are going to be helpful because once you learn this in your elementary years, as you're writing your papers, that's where you're really going to know whether you know it or not. And I remember teaching capitalization with one of my students who still struggled with it as a middle schooler and even into high school. And I was just so confused as to why my student wasn't capitalizing the first word, the first letter of the first word of the first sentence. So I think this is an anomaly, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you can learn all of this in grade 3 and 4 and 5, and it will take you about 8 years to master it. So you will still need these books for your students as they get older, but these books are for you as the teacher to have additional resources when you are teaching these lessons. Grammatically correct. This is probably the most extensive, thickest book that I have. I think I have maybe one more that is, and this is going to give you much more detail about the different grammar concepts, and also much more, like say for the high school, college student could use this a bit more than the middle school student. And you as a parent will definitely get way more out of this book than what's necessary for your grade 3, 4, 5 students. So this is just another example of a resource, and I wanted to share all of the resources that I happen to have so that you can choose what's best for your student, because you don't necessarily want to get something, in my opinion, that's just for middle elementary. If you intend to use it as the student gets older and you want to just invest in one resource, then maybe you can pick and choose which one resource to invest in rather than investing in multiple resources as I've done, because as we went through them, I found that some were excellent, I love them so much, and other ones not so much. The only grammar book you'll ever need almost ended up being the only grammar book you would ever need, but I used this one extensively when I was doing my own grammar curriculum for my student, because I use different stories than the ones that are typically offered in these grades, and I use this to help create those lessons. And I found this really helpful, but not extensive enough. It was really great, but I needed more than what this book could offer. This book does come with a workbook sold separately, and I did not like this workbook too much. And I think this is the one, or maybe there's another one that I didn't like, but let me explain to you what I don't like about quizzes. I don't like it when things are incorrect, when there's incorrect grammar or incorrect spelling or incorrect vocabulary word that the student has to cross out and then write the correct one. I don't like those because it again formulates this pathway in the brain of seeing something that's wrong, that then you need to sort of like pull those roots out, pull that weed out, and make sure that the correct information is in place. Now, this approach might be fabulous for a college student or an adult who's mastered these topic areas, but I really, really don't like that approach for a younger child. So if you find quizzes that are like that, in my opinion, I would say forego them for quizzes that I'm going to show you instead. So this one's called the Perfect English Grammar Workbook. And so far, the reason why I like this one is that it gives you, everything is correct, but you might have to choose which goes, like what word goes with which abbreviation, or which word best suits this sentence, or how do you do a compound word with these words. But nothing, as far as I can tell so far, is incorrect. They're all correct that you have to then combine and put together. So this would be probably better for a little bit higher than 4th grade, but this would be an excellent resource for you to grow into, that you could use as the parent teacher to present these lessons with the background information, the terminology and the grammar, etc., that then your child could then grow into this in the coming years. The last book that I really liked is called The Blue Book of Grammar and Punctuation. And I like this book because of the way that it was laid out. It was very easy to use. It wasn't my most used workbook or resource, but I did appreciate how much was available in this book and for the middle elementary grade level. So you're going to see a lot of words that are commonly either misspelled or misunderstood because they are spelled the same way, but they have different meanings. And that's going to take up quite a number of pages at the beginning of this grammar book. So those are the grammar resources that I have, and the reading list for teaching grammar with imagination. I do want to remind you that the grammar approach for the Waldorf philosophy is very different than other philosophies, and personally I preferred the Susan Weiss Bauer classical education approach for grammar, but I did mix the two together just a little bit. But I did prefer that approach over the traditional Waldorf approach. The way that I mix the two is this way. I love sentence diagramming. I love the way that that program goes through the grammar narration in a very age-appropriate manner. I love the progression of that. The way that I sort of combine the two is that the imaginative part of the Waldorf education also includes other lessons, and these ones coordinate really well with the history or the Norse mythology and the main lesson block on Kalevala and Beowulf. And so the words or the passages, the spelling words, the vocabulary sometimes are drawn from those history lessons. So you can see a connection between something that is very imaginative later on or in combination to other lessons in the curriculum. And then you have your more head work, the more reality-based learning. And these are just my words to explain it. In the spelling, you have your spelling, but it's still connected in some way to something that's a little bit more imaginative. And another way that you can do that is by choosing different colors for the different parts of speech. And I cannot remember if this was originally in the curriculum. I think it was, or if I learned it somewhere else, so I apologize for that. But they suggest using the color blue for nouns. So when you're writing a noun, especially if you're going to do sentence diagramming, which I do not remember when it's introduced in the Waldorf curriculum or if it is introduced at all. But I used blue for writing nouns. I used red for writing verbs. So nouns are stationary. Nouns don't move. Verbs move. And so nouns, I imagine them being blue because it's a more sedentary color, a more calm color, and red is a more vibrant color, a more movement color. And so the verbs would be in red and the nouns would be in blue. And then I would do the adjectives in purple to coordinate with the blue, and the adverbs in orange to coordinate with the verbs. So that's the way that I approached it. I thought it made a lot of sense to me, and I don't know that the students found it any more engaging to do the different colors. So one other thing that I want to share with you for the grammar curriculum, and this is going to work for grammar and for history and honestly for all of the subjects, and that's the creative form drawing. And I have 3 books to share with you because it coordinates in some way with the 10-year-old student in grade 4. And so I wouldn't suggest you needing all 3 of these books for grade 4, but you can choose the one that's going to best suit your family depending on the ages of your students. So we're going to start with workbook 1, and I'm going to flip through this one and share with you. This is one of the most stunning, beautiful books. And the reason why I like including form drawing is not just for the stories that you can tell along with the form drawing, but it's really great for their fine motor skills. It's very artistic as well. And in some ways, it's going to coordinate with the development of the child throughout the years, depending on their age and the kind of form drawing that you're doing. So there's a lot of symmetry when you get to about grade 4, I believe. And there's actually symmetry in grade 1, but it's larger forms and simple forms, but you get to more intricate forms in symmetry as the children get older. And then you can see that there are motifs that are going to resemble nature, which is great for your botany lessons. There are other motifs that are going to look a little bit like the emblems or the like say a Viking ship, like that decorative form drawing and writing. The name escapes me at the moment, but you have a lot of those symbols, And you're going to see that that's also mimicked in the form drawing. So this one is for ages 6 to 10 years, and this is workbook number 1. We have used this one extensively. It actually is a little bit more challenging than it looks. It looks so simple, but when you actually get down to working on it, it can be quite challenging at times. You can see some of the form drawings get pretty intricate and involved. And then for workbook number 2, which is ages 10 to 12, you're going to see even more intricacies, and this will be really great for grade 4 and grade 5. You can see that there's going to be a lot of types of movements that will work for botany. And as you're moving into Greek mythology and Roman history, you'll see that a lot of these would work as well. And then we have creative form drawing for the 4 temperaments. This is such a great approach for form drawing. This is workbook 3, and this is for ages 6 to 12. And again, really beautiful work. And for these, for form drawing, I would consider using either block crayons or your larger Lyra color pencils, in my opinion. And you can find more information about the different art tools and mediums in the first video in this series. That link is down in the description box below. I almost forgot to show you the one grammar resource that is not for the teacher parent. It is for the student, for you to read aloud to the student. This is not necessarily a Waldorf material. I do love including picture books in our main lessons and in our homeschool, but you probably wouldn't find a book like this with these kinds of illustrations in a Waldorf setting. I do like them. I love including these kinds of things into our opening activities. And so this one is by Discovery Toys. And honestly, I'm not sure that it's still available. A lot of our resources, since we've been homeschooling for many years, can be old, outdated, or not published anymore. So I would just encourage you to find something similar, because I am sure there are even more resources now than what were available when we were first starting to homeschool, but this is just an idea. So this one is Adventures in Grammar, and this one's called To Root, To Toot, and To Parachute, What is a Verb? And this one's called Nearly, Dearly, Insincerely, What is an adverb? And this one's called A Mink, A Fink, A Skating Rink, What is a noun? And this one is called Hairy, Scary, Ordinary, What is an adjective? And I think they're just really fun books to add to this main lesson block. I have a few more resources to share with you. 2 of them are games and great interactive activities that you can play or use during your opening activities. The first one is similar in some ways to Scrabble, which if you've ever played Scrabble, you know that it takes quite some time to play. And while I love to play Scrabble far more than I like to play this game, I think this is a really great alternative and a quicker version, and you still get the same enjoyment out of putting words together and getting points. And if you have children who are competitive, then this will be a lot of fun. Not all children are competitive, and sometimes boys tend to enjoy competition more than girls do. That's in my experience and in the research as well. So you can choose how to play your games. And also remember that when children are young, cooperative games usually go over a little bit better than competitive games, but you know your child best. And so providing you these alternatives or just this range of options for games and interactive activities just will allow you to choose what's best for your family, and also to modify games so that they suit your family. So this game comes with cards with letters, and the numbers below indicate the points that you would get for putting words together with these letters. And this is just another way to work on spelling or vocabulary or just the creative process of putting words together with the letters that you have. So this is a game that we've had for many years, but honestly, we haven't played too often just because we prefer to play Scrabble if we're going to be playing a word game like this. A really, really fun game to play, which has been around for ages, is Mad Libs, and this one, or these kinds of games, are ones where you have to include or fill in a noun or an adjective, just a part of speech. And usually one person is the one who is filling in the words by asking everyone else. Like, you get to see what the story is about. There are ways for you to play it without really knowing what the story is about so that everyone can enjoy a good laugh when you read the story. And then you get to practice the different parts of speech. I found this really, really helpful when my children were still learning about parts of speech and the trial and error of trying to choose a word and then it doesn't fill the requirement. So I really like playing this game. It does get a little bit old after a while. Like we'll get into phases where we'll play it every day or multiple times a day for a week or two straight, and then we'll put it away for literally months, sometimes a year before we pull it out again. Something else that you can do that I maybe only did once, but it's a really great creative process that will be even more instructional, more educational than just filling in the words, is to take a piece of writing that your child has already done and allow them to remove, or maybe just start by underlining the different parts of speech that then you can remove, erase, or add a little post-it sticky over it. And then the child can then ask the rest of the family or other students different parts of speech to fill in to writing that he or she has already done. And I find that to be even better than the more passive play of just asking a noun or an adjective. This way the child is actually writing their own story. And if they know that it's for a game, they can get really creative. And I love that part of it, because sometimes we'll choose words that we know are just so outlandish because we want a good laugh. So the child can write their own story, then identify the parts of speech. And really, this would probably be once the child has mastered a few parts of speech and can easily identify them. And then you've got the writing, you've got the identification, and then you have the fun of filling in those parts of speech with other students. So there are many different variations of this game, lots of different subject areas. And so this one is the one for spy Mad Libs, and they have them for just about any topic area. I have two more resources here. I'm going to save this one for a minute because this one's tremendous, but I'm going to show you a non-Waldorf resource first. This one's first language lessons. This is for the well-trained mind. This is level 4, and this is by Susan Weisbauer and Sarah Buffington. This series has been my most used grammar and writing curriculum in all of our homeschool. And this is pretty much, I would say, the opposite of the Waldorf approach. The reason why I'm showing it to you is because for a person who, I'm speaking now to the homeschool family. So for a person who is not trained as a teacher and maybe needs a refresher on some of these concepts that you're teaching, I find this book to be really tremendous and a really great help because it's so user-friendly and because it lays out the information in a very simple way without complexities in the beginning. And I want to speak about this because it is a really big pet peeve of mine. But because it is so simple and it takes you step by step along the way, you can feel very successful every step of the way with confidence, learning as you go the information that's being presented, so that by the time you are done with the program, you have a really good grasp of language, sentence structure, parts of speech, simple writing. And simple, I don't mean simple in a way that's not useful. I mean simple in a way that's concise and that meets the objective of whatever prompt or lesson is being given. So this one is level 4, so it does start a lot more simple than this. I'm bringing up level 4, and I actually don't know if the levels coordinate with the grade levels themselves, but I'm bringing it to you because a lot of the grammar that's going to be in this level is going to be really great for middle to upper elementary. So I have actually used this even with my middle schoolers. When I found this curriculum, my oldest was already maybe 6th grade or maybe 7th grade. And I was blown away by just the simplicity and how well this curriculum was written that I ended up using it with him. But because he was so advanced and I just started at the very basics, we could do an entire week's worth of lessons in literally like 40 minutes or, less than an hour, maybe a half an hour. It was so quick. It was so enjoyable too. And then as you progress, you'll get into sentence diagramming, which really helps you deconstruct a sentence and understand the different parts of speech. And I really love it. What I don't love are curricula or workbooks that present a very complex sentence to work on a very simple objective. So say figuring out the subject for instance, or the subject and the predicate, but you've also included a prepositional phrase. It's like, well, let's just take that prepositional phrase out for a moment and let's work on like the objective, and let's simplify this before you make it complex. And I see this far too often in workbooks, and I question what is the motivation of doing something like that in the beginning. Wait until they're much older to present a complex situation like that. I also find it in test taking. So while we are a homeschooling family, we still do state tests and we still do school tests. And for my children in general, I do want them to learn good test taking skills, but I'm not super concerned with the results in general. I mean, they come in, whether they do well or not so well, depending on what your standards are. That for me is of less concern, because the test that really matters for them, and for us, it's when they exit high school early to do community college. So they usually go in their 10th grade year and they need to take an exit exam. Things are changing. I'm in the state of California. They have changed the exit exam. So this is like what's happened for at least 3 of 4 of my children. But here's what I noticed is that those exams were very straightforward. They tested a very particular problem, or they had a very specific objective. What I noticed with the state test, and maybe not so much with the school test, but I noticed this with the state test a lot. And granted, it's been a while since I did those practice tests, because when my children were preparing for those tests or taking those tests, I was curious, like what are some of the questions? And granted, this has been a few years, so things certainly could have changed. But what I noticed was that there would be questions where there would be a right answer, a really good answer, a clear answer, and a wrong answer. And it really frustrated me that 3 out of those 4 answers could be correct depending on how you're looking at the question, or what is the motivation of the question. What are they really asking for? And I was so disturbed by the complexity, the unnecessary complexity of those questions. I don't feel like it really tested. I mean, it tested something clearly, but I don't think that it tested what I would have wanted my students to know. Do they understand this vocabulary? Do they understand the parts of speech? Can they construct a sentence with the correct punctuation, with the correct spelling? Do they understand the differences in words that sound the same but are spelled differently, that have different meanings? Can they construct a paragraph? Can they convey a thought? Can they answer a question that's being asked in an essay? Those are the things that I really want my students to understand very well, because that's the basis of a language, in my opinion, the basis of a language arts curriculum, where you are working on your reading and your writing and your comprehension, your spelling, your grammar. Those are the kinds of basics that you need for your foundation before you move on to things that are more complex. So this curriculum really delivers. It is the Susan Weisbauer curriculum. This is an older cover. Certainly the covers could have changed. This is First Language Lessons is level 4. There's Writing with Ease as well. There's the Ordinary Parent's Guide to Reading. Those are all materials that I have used and used with multiple of my children. I think at least 3 out of 4 of my children have all gotten, actually, I take that back. Actually, all 4 of my children have gotten classical education through Susan Weisbauer in some way or another, either in the history or in the language arts. And 3 out of 4 of my children got the language arts. I eventually dispensed with the history because I didn't really care for a lot of the approach, but we did do it at least with one of my children. And I did really like, this is back in the early 2000s, she did have a CD version of her whole history of the world. And that was brilliant because we really were into audio. And this is before you had audio platforms that made it a lot easier to source audio. So we really enjoyed those CDs. So that's aside the point, but the actual point is that I do really appreciate the classical approach to education for certain subject areas, and grammar writing is one of them. However, we will still do a ton of narration in our Waldorf approach. The reason why I bring this up is that for the Waldorf curriculum, at least the one that I'm using and sharing, the live education one, I found that to be not as user-friendly as this material, and I ended up resorting to this material far more. And now that I'm very familiar with this material and I understand the big picture of what's being achieved at the elementary level, I've ended up dispensing with this curriculum and writing my own that's more religious based, so that I can include all of the grammar, but use stories that are significant for us, for our culture, and for our heritage, and for our religion, versus the stories that are presented in this curriculum. So I just want to put that out there, that this is one that I really love, highly recommend if you are finding the Waldorf approach a little bit challenging. Continuing the journey to literacy. This is the second of the Roadmap to Literacy series. Well, there are two of them, and this one is for grades 4 through 8. I just want to point out how massive this book is, how thorough this book is, and how sad that I am that I did not have this book when we were first starting out. This is a labor-intensive book, only because this, I think, is primarily intended for teachers or as a homeschooler to prepare yourself for your lessons. It is extremely thorough. It's going to go through 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. That's 5 years of education. And now the other book that goes through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, so just 3 years, is smaller, but still proportionately about the same as far as content. And what I want to show you a little bit of the contents here. What I want to say also is that I haven't utilized this book in our homeschool yet, and I'm glad to have it, and it's, I think, a tremendous resource. And again, sad that I didn't have it sooner. If you are going to invest in a book like this, I would say do it even a year before. Like if you're teaching 4th grade, rather, if you still have a 3rd grader, I would say invest in a book like this if you anticipate wanting to really have a good grasp of the Waldorf approach, so that you can create your lessons, or so that you can have understanding of what is the motivation for these lessons, what is the objective of the lessons in a Waldorf setting. So this is first going to go over like Waldorf methodologies, which I think is, well, first essential background information. But then what I really love is the Waldorf methodologies. I want to say that while I really love Waldorf education and I use it extensively, I do separate Waldorf education from Steiner and Steiner's work. And I know that that doesn't make sense because they are intertwined, but I rarely use Steiner in conversation. I rarely refer to it as Steiner education. I almost always refer to it as Waldorf education. And the reason why I say that is because it's my opinion, just my opinion, that Waldorf education is an indoctrination to a particular way of thinking. And I do believe that that thinking is based on Steiner's work and his motivations and objectives with anthroposophy and all of the other things that go along with that way of thinking, which includes biodynamic gardening and other aspects that I'm less familiar with. The reason why I want to keep them very separate is because I have very different objectives and motivations for my education of my children. And it is also spiritually based, but it's religious based. And I feel like those two objectives, Steiner education at its core and the education that I want to do at its core, are actually very different. But it is a lot of the, I guess, other aspects, like it might be based on child development, which it is, and the education is based on what the child is going through, but I want my stories to reflect my objective rather than Steiner's objective. So in this book, you're going to find a lot of references to Steiner's work. He's quoted a lot. In a lot of Waldorf material, you'll find Steiner quoted, and you can refer back to his original lectures and whatnot. And I have a few of those books, which I find tremendously helpful. But the reason why I say this is because if you are not fully invested in Steiner education and Waldorf education, then take this book and try to extrapolate the child, in my opinion, the child development aspects. Try to extract the objectives of what literacy is for children from grades 1 to 8 and use those lessons and those tools and for your homeschool. So and I find this information fascinating, but I do want to put it out there that while I choose a wide assortment of books, I'm never standing behind a singular book 100%, unless it's literally like the Quran, because I'm Muslim. That's a book that I will stand behind 100% without question. But every other book, there is question, and I would never stand behind any other book. Even one that I would write or produce, never stand behind it 100% because there can be mistakes and there are biases and there are specific motivations and objectives. So wanted to clarify that. I know that I've shared a ton of material so far, and I'm choosing this book to really clarify those thoughts. And it's just because you'll find Steiner mentioned a lot, and you'll find him mentioned a lot in a lot of other resources as well. Our Waldorf curriculum mentions Steiner's work as well and quotes him often. What I like about this book as well is that you'll see in section 3, aspects of language arts, it's really extensive. So it's going to go through storytelling, reading, research skills, note-taking, outlining, composition, essays, reports, creative writing, correspondence, and more and more and more. And it's going to go through 5 grade levels. So this is quite an investment. It's being priced at around $70 to $80, which honestly is a steal compared to the price of curriculum for a single grade. This is for 5 grade levels, and granted, it's just for the language arts, which is a huge basis of education in the elementary years. Language arts and math make up the majority of the skill sets academically, I should say. And so this would be a tremendous investment and a really good price, but it is still an investment because this one runs you, it's less than 100, I'll say 70 to 100. And then you have grades 1 through 3, which is a little bit less because it's a bit smaller. So it is a really big investment. So if you decide that this is something that you want to do, I would say set some time aside to really read through it and contemplate it and understand it. Because if any of the material in this book is very different than the approach that you're used to, it's going to take a little time, at least for me, it takes a little time to process that information, to change my way of thinking, to create lessons that can meet the point of this book, the objective of this book, or the objective of the different types of learning, separate from what you've already been doing, and to also source additional materials that can help you along that way. You might need other storybooks, or you might need to polish up on your storytelling skills. You might need to get, we have a lot of resources online, but a dictionary, a thesaurus, understanding different writing prompts, the purpose of writing, whether it's like an essay that's a narrative or a persuasive essay, those kinds of things. It will take a little time to process that information, to understand it, so that you can then create your lessons. Really loved this. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we're exploring the curriculum for grade 4. I'm sharing with you the Waldorf inspired resources that you can use to accompany the grade 4 curriculum. I'm using the live education curriculum, or you can use these resources to put together your own main lesson blocks. But honestly, once you see all the resources that I'm using, it probably will be easier just to get the main lessons from live education or from another curriculum. So we've already gone through the introduction of the 4th year. We've also done the video on grammar resources. Today, we're going to be looking at the math main lesson block. So if you want to check out some of the other videos, you can find all of the videos listed in the description box below. You can also check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information. That link is also in the description box below. So I do have other math videos, quite extensive math videos. So today we're going to do something a little bit shorter than I typically do. We're going to go over some of the math that you can expect in the 4th grade year and some of the resources that I have used and do recommend for grade 4. So even though fractions are introduced in grade 4, the student will still be needing to practice a lot of their multiplication facts, because multiplication is going to take, in my opinion, several years to master. So the introduction of a particular subject area might be in the year that you see it in, but then for the following several years, that information is being mastered, or you're becoming proficient at it first before you master it, because a lot of these basic building blocks for math, you're going to need them for pre-algebra and algebra, and maybe in some capacity for geometry, but you definitely need them as you progress through the grades. So for these lessons, you're going to start, or maybe finish up with some of your multiplication facts and just make sure that the students at least understand, even if they're not proficient in them, before you move into your fractions. Now, while I really love the approach, the Waldorf approach for many subject areas and for the development of the child, I find that diving into math this way, whether it's this curriculum or another curriculum, can be so challenging when it comes to fractions in particular. So my recommendation is to be using the terminology of math and fractions in particular years before you actually introduce it in a written form. And the way that would look like for young children is they understand, I think they understand the concept of half pretty well from about grade 1. Prior to that, or for instance, you can look at really young toddlers who don't quite understand quantity very much, or maybe they wouldn't take, like, say, 4 broken half cookies over 1 cookie, even though the 4 half cookies is more. Sometimes those concepts for really young children, they're not established yet. As the child gets older, the concept of half comes in kind of on the earlier side. So I would use that terminology, half, a third, use twice as much, often as the children are growing, so that the concept of, or the use of those words is in the child's vocabulary, even if the concept isn't well established, because the concept of parts of a whole is something that is reserved for the grade 4 student. Once they've gone through the 9-year change, the idea of portions or a part of is a lot easier for them to understand, because they are now separate from the world. They can really see that they themselves they have their inner world, they have their themselves separate from the outer world. And there's also this understanding of time that's passed and time moving quickly, moving forward. There's all these changes that happen, and I do speak about them a little bit more in the first video in this series, so you can check that out. And then, of course, the curriculum has more extensive information on that as well. So the actual teaching of fractions is really best used, in my opinion, at grade 4, or, in my opinion, beyond grade 4. I feel the longer you wait for fractions, the easier it is for a student to comprehend them. But the terminology is part of the vocabulary that's going to be used prior to actually doing the lesson work. And generally, I will do our math main lesson block earlier on in the year. I tend to do it in the fall with the start of school, so that the student has the whole year to practice these math concepts. And the only exception is with fractions. I would recommend that you wait till a little bit later in the year and do a lot more interactive math with fractions, a lot more living math with fractions before you actually dive in to the main lesson work. And this is not typical. I usually like to do the math at the beginning of the school year, but this is one instance where I do feel that a lot more living math, living practice is going to serve the students a little bit better. So you're going to be using a main lesson book with the main lesson block approach, or main lesson approach. You can find, of course, more information on the first video where I talk about the main lesson and the main lesson books itself. And you can see here that they're using the landscape main lesson book, and that's going to work really well for working through fractions. I've used both the landscape and the portrait, so it's up to you what you'd like to do, but you can see how much easier it is to do this lesson work with the landscape. Although it probably is easy with the portrait as well, but the way that it's laid out here is quite visual. This book is going to go into imaginative math when it comes to fractions. And while I think this is a brilliant approach, for my mind, it didn't work so well. And I prefer a bit more of a maybe an intellectual approach when it comes to certain math concepts. So I did not use this extensively or often with my children. We did use it, but not as well as the curriculum would have suggested, and I did not use it with all of my children. We chose to use some of the math resources more heavily than the main lesson block, and we had more workbook activity and more living math versus more math that went into our main lesson book. Now, we still did a lot of the projects with fractions, the visualization of these fractions. We did still do a lot of that, but we did that in a more lesson activity rather than in an activity or a lesson work that would go into the main lesson book. So let me share with you some of the resources that you can use for grade 4. I love the Key to series. They have Key to fractions, decimals, percents, measurements, metric measurements, algebra, and geometry. There may be more, but those are the ones that we have used extensively, very consistently with all 4 of my children. We have used this series and I love it so much. So this series has a very simple approach to any of the subject areas that I just mentioned. It's so easy that it's almost child-led, self-directed. There's very little explanation that's needed from the teacher or the parent. That's if you are doing this at the correct grade level. If you're finding that you have to help your child extensively with the material, it might mean that they're not quite ready for it. This is generally used as practice, not usually used as the main lesson, but I have to admit that I have used this extensively as the primary learning outside of our experiential learning. So I have used this over textbooks or main lesson books. I like this because for the most part, there aren't too many questions. For the most part, it divides the subject areas very simply. It's very progressive, 1 page or 2 pages for one concept. You get to practice it before moving on. Each step that you're moving on is a small step. It's very sequential. I really love the approach. The fractions comes with 4 books, and then it also comes with an answer key as well. They're sold separately or in a bundle. You can find them all over the internet. I think I used to buy them from Rainbow Resource when we would buy them. These are now extra because I'm down to homeschooling my last child. We have Key to measurements, and of course they come with the answer key as well. And I think there are 4 books in this series. There's also metric measurement as well. And then you have the percents, which I think only have 3 books, and I think I've got 2 sets here. So 4 and there's decimals, that's for this grade level as well, which I don't have handy to show you. So for grade 4, I would use fractions, decimals, and percents in that order. And I would also use measurement and metric measurement. And with the measurement, you can do some of the work before you go through fractions. The rest of it you need to do after fractions. And so when I haven't been ready to present fractions to my students, I've done the measurement, and then they will work through it until they get to the part where you need fractions or proportions. And then I will stop that book, and then we'll move on to fractions, and then we will return to the measurement book. So quite a few for grade 4, and whatever you don't finish in grade 4, you can definitely bump to grade 5, especially for decimals and percents, because I feel like that takes a lot longer. I feel like these are 3 huge topics to explore in 1 year, and I found that my students did take much longer to really absorb and understand these concepts. So we spent a lot of the 4th grade year actually going over our general math facts and multiplication facts quite extensively. So some of the things that I have to share with you here are for opening activities, for proficiency work, and for multiplication. So I'm going to first take you actually to teaching mathematics in Rudolf Steiner schools for classes 1 through 8. This is a fabulous resource if you're looking to create your own curriculum or your own main lesson blocks without the use of curriculum. I found this to be a little bit challenging to work through on my own, so I did prefer to have a curriculum that went through all the different grades and explanations for those grades. But if you felt compelled to do it on your own, this is a fabulous resource. It's really extensive for all 8 grades. I have just only good things to say about it. Even though we did not use it as extensively as I wanted, it was a great resource to see the progression of all the lessons from grade 1 to 8. Another great resource is called Active Math. Now we got this after we had already done quite a bit of active math as it is, and so it was great to see these examples in print, but honestly it's, in my opinion, really difficult to extrapolate how to actually do these from reading a book. I found it a lot easier for me to experience these things, and I had the fortune of going to a few different Waldorf conferences in person where we got to experience these things. And once I did them with other adults and we practiced some of these active math like techniques, then I was able to bring them to our homeschool a lot better. So one of the things that we did, we can use bean bags. We could also use our counting sticks, which are basically dowels. You could do this with your hands by clapping. And that is to do something that's active while you're doing math. And so these are just 2 bean bags that you can toss back and forth if you're just in a classroom of 1. And if you're in a classroom of many, you can combine the students into groups of 2 or 3. Note that this, what you hope would only be like a 10-minute project, exercise, opening activity, will end up being much longer and way more chaotic than you expect. But you can use these to toss back and forth, and each time you're tossing them, you can be doing a math fact. For instance, you could do your skip counting in preparation for the multiplication tables. You could do 3, 6, 9, and go back and forth. Or you could do 3 is 1 times 3, or you could do 6 is 2 times 3, or you know, or 3 times 1, or 3 times 2. You can begin with the 3, like 3 is 3 times 1, 6 is 3 times 2. You can do it that way. And, or you can do 2 times 6, and then you can shout out 12. And I don't know why I didn't go stick with the 3s. You can do 2 times 3, and then you can shout out 6, for instance. And then you're tossing them back and forth. And now there's a lot that goes into this. There's coordination. There is unison with the person that you're tossing it to. There is keeping the same pace. If you're tossing back with like 2 is 1 times 2, and all of a sudden you have a student that says 2 is 1 times 2, then that's obviously not going to work. So there's a lot that goes into doing active math, and that's just with the bean bags. If you want your children to stay at their seats, you can be clapping if you want to do that instead, or you can use counting sticks. I call them counting sticks. They're just dowels that you can tap. It gets a little bit noisy. That's another option that you can do. Something that engages the body while they're doing their math facts. I also have this book called Painless Fractions, and if you want to have something that's a little bit story driven but not exactly, and something that can take you through the different topics without a textbook, then this would be a really great resource for you. I love having these resources, but I haven't utilized them just one resource entirely. Sometimes I will take like an idea from a book, or a technique from another, or a math trick from another book, because we have a book on like lots of math tricks on how to do multiplication and addition and all these different wacky ways that you wouldn't otherwise know. But I'm not utilizing just one book from cover to cover. When I've done that in the past, it's taken a lot of our time with not the results that I expected. So I like these as resources more so than something that I'm definitely going to use like every day with a main lesson or in lieu of a main lesson. Now, the reason why I like showing these is that there are some students, some families where this is just perfect for them, because they have a child or a student where this is going to be just the right kind of math for them. So I want to share with you as many of the resources that we've used or that we have so that you can pick the right ones for your family. So I do utilize some workbooks, not often, but we use them for our daily work. So we use them when we are practicing math facts especially, and we use them when we are practicing grammar concepts. But we're not going to use them as a tool for learning unless it's the Key to Fraction series or Key to Decimal series, in addition to our engaging math, the math that we're actually engaged in. But as far as, say, a textbook and a workbook, we're not going to use those typically as part of our new learning. We will definitely use them as part of our review learning. So a book like this, which is just super simple in that it's just your multiplication tables. I think it's I think it's just the 12 multiplication tables, and you just have the same work over and over again. You're just practicing it daily. Then this is the kind of work that I like, because you can do one page or one page front and back. You can pull them out of this workbook and you can staple them with other kinds of work that you can give your child on a daily basis. It can be part of their opening activities or independent work. It can take 10 minutes or less or more, depending on the age of the child. It's great to keep them engaged and doing some learning while you're preparing other work. And I love including that to get them proficient and eventually master some of those math facts that they have been learning throughout the years. Fractions in disguise. I love using picture books with all of our lessons. Again, it's not something you would typically find in a Waldorf setting, but I love including them in our opening activities. And sometimes it's just that little change in perspective that helps them understand a concept, especially when it comes to math. It takes, in my opinion, so much to really internalize fractions, decimals, and percents that you never know what kind of resource or activity is going to help connect those dots together for that child to really comprehend that math concept. Fractions, decimals, and percents. This is another picture book. I love using these either to introduce ideas that we're going to learn later on or to review ideas that we have previously done. I love using books like this for that purpose, and having multiple kids in a homeschool. Right now I'm just homeschooling the one, my last one, but generally having multiple children in a homeschool means that you always have someone who's looking forward to a lesson, or someone who needs that extra review because they've already done that lesson, or someone who's right in the middle of that lesson. And that's a really great opportunity to keep those skills sharp because you are constantly either preparing, reviewing, or doing those lessons. Math in the Garden is one of my favorite resources of all time when it comes to math. It is brilliant because it combines working out in nature with math that is practical and informative, and it makes sense and it has purpose, and I love it so much. We have so many videos just on this book alone. You can find that complete playlist down the description box below so you can get some ideas. This book may be difficult to find, so if you find it secondhand or you find it on a website, I would snatch it up. It's just so that you know, I think it was around $30-ish. So if you find it for that or less, definitely pick it up. It was such a great resource for us. And this is a great way to have practical living math that includes fractions, proportions, measurement, and more. So here's another, I have a couple of workbooks, and these are for grade 4, so ages 9, 10, even 11. And this again goes through the math that you will have learned in grade 4. So I wouldn't necessarily use this in grade 4. I would use this in grade 5 and 6 and even 7, because this is going to help polish up whatever that child kind of didn't quite understand and had some time to grow and mature and live the math, so that when you come back to the workbook, it makes a lot more sense. And then one more workbook we have is a Kumon workbook. A lot of times I will get these workbooks like hand-me-down or secondhand, or, you know, at a library bookstore for not very much. And I'll just collect those because even if I'm not in grade 4, this is going to help for grade 5 and 6, even though the concepts are introduced earlier on. I think the mastery of these concepts happens later. I have a few that are sort of new resources for us, so I only used it for 1 or 2 of my 4 children. And this one of them is a multiplication board. This one, mistakenly, I bought this one and it only goes up to the 9s multiplication, and this one goes up to 12. And we use this one extensively with 1, maybe 2 of my children. I really like this one because it's just so gorgeous. And what we would do is, on occasion, we would dump them all out, and so they have the question on one side and the answer on the other side. And we would dump them all out, and then we would start to pick them, and I would pick one and give the question to my son or my daughter. And then if they got it right, they would, you know, if they got it wrong, it wasn't a big deal. I'd give them time to get it right. And one little teaching technique that I learned many years ago is to wait when they give you an answer. Don't just jump on them to say it was right or wrong. Give them some breath to correct themselves if they've done it wrong, because almost always my kids will correct themselves if they've given an immediate answer that's wrong, either spelling or a question or a math fact. They usually can correct themselves, and it gives them the confidence rather than the anxiety of being corrected right away if they're wrong. So just a little tip that if you're doing these, give them a moment, and if they get it right, or when they get it right, we'll just put the little peg back onto the board, and that way that's part of the cleanup. And then we ended up getting the 12 times table, which doesn't look quite as nice, and because it has so many more questions, sometimes we would either partially take them out or would take them all out, but it'd take us a couple of days to answer all the questions and put them back in. Sometimes we would do the answer and try to do the, you know, the person would say the question, and then other times we would say the question and then they would say the answer. So 2 different ways to play this. Really liked this resource. It's not good for really young children. Like if you've got toddlers or younger, these are choking hazards, so do be really careful. So in that case, it's not great. Also, if you tend to lose pieces for games because that's your vibe in your family, this might be one where if you're the kind of person that really wants all the pieces and not lose the one, this is really easy to lose pieces. We just happen to be careful with ours, and I would not put it away without having all of the pieces, but I realize that that's not typical. So this is one thing that you could lose those pieces pretty easily. So I just wanted to put that out there with some of these math manipulatives. So this was the same. The quality of this one is not quite as good, but at least it has the full 12 times tables. And then this one goes through the fractions, and I really, really like the showcase of fractions being presented this way, because then you can really see, like say the 12ths here, 1/12, like you need all 12 to create the 1. So you can really see how this is divided up and it still equals 1, or the halves, and then you can see that it has the fraction and the decimal on the other side. So I really like having these kinds of tools at the ready to have a visual to explain some of these math concepts that, in my opinion, for fractions, I really think it's one of the most challenging math topics to master, maybe outside of algebra in the younger years, like say before high school. I find fractions to be, and decimals and percents to be super challenging. So having as many resources as you can have that you find appropriate is really helpful, because you just don't know what's going to click for the child. And of course, do as much hands-on as you possibly can, because I do feel like that really helps them. One more thing I want to show you is a game. We have tons of math games, but I want to show you this one. It's for multiplication and division, because the one for fractions is so advanced. I would not recommend it until your child was well into middle school or even high school. I believe the fraction one is one of the most challenging ones, that and the integers one. So this one is going to go over multiplication, and this is great for 4th grade because, again, we're still trying to master the multiplication tables, which in my experience took well into late elementary and into middle school before it was truly mastered, and that's just for our family. But these games are a lot of fun to play. You can just pull out like maybe 5 or 10 cards. They come with different abilities, from 1 point or 1 dot to 3 dots being the hardest, and that way you can, depending on your child's ability, choose the cards necessary, or you can give your child the easy cards and you can take the hard cards, or if you're not so great at math, you can reverse that. But I really like including these kinds of math games into our opening activities along with some movement math. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we are exploring the grade 4 curriculum. I'm sharing with you my Waldorf inspired books and resources that can complement the main lesson books. These are from Live Education, or you can use these resources to create your own lessons, although once you see them all, it's probably going to just be easier to buy the curriculum itself. So we've already gone through the introduction of the 4th year. We've already covered the resources for grammar. We've explored our math resources, focusing on fractions and our multiplication tables. And today we're going to look at the history for the grade 4 curriculum. Now, history for grade 4 is going to go through Beowulf, which is the Angles, Saxons, Celts, and Danes. Now, I do have an extensive video that goes through the entire curriculum, an extensive review. You can find that video down in the description box below. I go through each of these main lesson blocks. We also have the Kalevala, and we also have Norse Myths. Now, I already did an extensive video that goes over all of the books and resources you can use for a Norse mythology unit, so I'm not going to go through all of those extensive resources now. And the other thing is that I don't have resources for Beowulf or the Kalevala, but inside the beginning of the main lesson block are some suggestions for the resources that you can use. And at the beginning of the grade 4 overview, there are also a list of the books and resources that you can add to this curriculum. And now that list is very concise, and it's just the books that you're going to need, versus the resources that I'm sharing are quite extensive. A lot of them in some ways are a little bit redundant. I'm sharing with you a lot of the books that I have in our library, and some of them are repeats in their their concepts and in the information that's provided in the books. So I wouldn't suggest getting all of the books that I suggest. That would be just probably too much to go through in a main lesson block or in a school year. A lot of times I do use these books and I do evaluate them, and I find ones that work better for us or better at a particular time. So for the Norse Myths, I do want to share with you a couple of resources that you can use. And one of them is actually suggested, and that's the Dollier's Book of Norse Myths. And this has really gorgeous illustrations compared to some of the other books on Norse mythology that we have. And so for that reason, this is the one that I chose to share with you. But I do have maybe 4 books that go over the Norse myths, and some have no illustrations or very minimal illustrations. Others have different kinds of illustrations. This just seems like a classic, so this is a great one to have if you're going to go over this topic, this main lesson block, or if you want to do that main lesson block and not buy the entire curriculum, then this would be a really great resource to have. If you wanted to have a more Waldorf approach to that lesson without buying the entire curriculum, you might consider the Charles Kovacs books. These are written or were written by a Waldorf teacher. These are his notes collected and published after his passing. And this is the material that he would have used or presented in his classroom. And so there are several books in the series. And if you wanted to do the main lesson block approach in a Waldorf style for this grade with this material, then this would be a really great resource. There are a couple of things that I'm not 100% loving about this book series, but with every book and resource, I would suggest that you use what you like, you omit the things that you don't like, and consider the parts that you do enjoy about the book, because there can be some things, maybe not in this one so much as other books, that are questionable. One more book I want to share with you is the Dollier's Book of Norwegian Folk Tales. This one is sort of new for us, and it doesn't quite coordinate with the main lesson blocks for this grade, but the essence of the stories I think would work really well for this grade if you wanted to omit one of the other main lesson blocks that are suggested, whether it's the Kalevala or Beowulf. For me personally, we did do the Norse myths, but we actually had stories that worked a little bit better for our religion and culture and heritage. We had a few books, or rather stories, that worked a little bit better. And to understand that a little bit more, to know which stories to use if you want to replace the stories that are provided in the main lesson, is to have a little bit more of an understanding of the development of the child and some of the maybe challenges that the child is going through at these different stages, and to choose stories that can help support those changes and support some of those challenges that the child is having. So at age 10, there is this colliding of the inner world and the outer world that the student is going through. And there is this understanding of time that the student did not have before, the child did not have before. Before the 9-year change, time seems eternal. I remember thinking that summer vacation and the school year were of equal time, that they both lasted a year. I didn't understand that one was shorter than the other. And then after the 9-year change, you are out of this imaginative pretend phase. You can still do pretend, but it's not, rather you have a distinction between reality and fiction or fantasy. Prior to that, there is not a very clear differentiation between reality and fantasy. Even if you explain to your child that it's pretend, they might parrot back to you that it's pretend, and they can say that they understand, but they really don't truly understand until they've gone through the 9-year change. That's the time when a lot of children stop believing in make-believe characters that they were told were real. If you imagine the holidays, that's a time when they are coming out of that and realizing that those are not real, that they're pretend and fantasy. So if you wanted to choose different stories for your student, I particularly like using the creation story And I do want to preface that the creation story I am a Muslim, so the creation story in Islam, while it might resemble the creation story of the Jews and the Christians, it is actually very distinctly different, and it is in those differences that really set these stories apart from one another. So I wouldn't just think that they were all the same, even though a lot of the aspects are the same, the people or the figures are the same, but the progression of the story is actually very, very different. And I go through the Islamic creation story of Adam and Eve, Adam and Hawa, on the blog post that accompanies this video so that you can understand how using these other stories might be the right kind of stories for you depending on your cultural background, your religious background, and maybe these stories aren't the right stories for you. You could still certainly use them, but if you're looking for something that's going to resonate a little bit more for you, then you might consider understanding the development of the child so that you can incorporate some of those other stories instead. So the last book is the Daler's book of Norwegian folk tales. And the reason why I liked including this one is that some of the stories are not as long as the Norse Myths stories. And so it's nice to include these in your opening activities. Some of the stories are still just as long, so you might split those up over 2 days or just expect to take a little bit more time in your opening activities. But I think this book would really coordinate well with the 4th grade year. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we are exploring the books and resources for grade 4 that are Waldorf inspired. So I have my Waldorf curriculum here. It is by Live Education, and we've already gone through the introduction to the 4th year and some aspects of child development. We've already covered our grammar resources. We've already covered our math resources, which include a lot of materials on fractions and the multiplication table. We spent some time going over I'm going to call them the history resources, but they're really like the epic poems and the mythology and folk tales for this grade level. So we had the Kalevala, we had Beowulf, and we had Norse Myths. And I also have a separate video if you want to put together your own Norse mythology main lesson block. I have lots of resources and a few games that you can include if you want to focus on that main lesson block. Okay, but today we are going to work on the man and animal block, or you can think of it as the zoology block, but very specific animals are chosen in this block. And I want to go over a little bit of the reason why certain animals are chosen and share with you that there are actually 3 different main lesson books for this particular subject area. And the last one we're going to go over later is local geography, history, and industry. So for this grade level, and I already have a video that extensively reviews the grade 4 curriculum, so I'm not going to do that at this moment, but I do want to share with you a little bit of what's included so you have an idea of the resources that can help support this curriculum, or resources if you want to do your own main lesson block. But honestly, once you see all of the books that I've collected, it's probably going to just be easier to get a curriculum. So for grade 4, we're going to be exploring the animal kingdom, and this particular main lesson block, or rather just this book, is going to go over drawing simple animal forms, and this is going to be helpful for the teacher. This is not a book that you're going to hand to your student, and you can see that some of these illustrations are pretty complex and probably beyond the capability of a grade 4 student. But I do have another book that's in a previous video that talks about painting and drawing in Waldorf schools from grade 1 to 8, and there you can see a few more examples of student work, or at least examples of what a student might be capable of. This is drawn by an adult for you to understand the forms that make up animals. So it's going to go over the ones that you're most likely, they're the archetypal forms, and so you're going to find them in all animals, but it's going to progress you through this so that you can have better success at drawing these animals with your student or on the chalkboard when you're going over these lessons. So there are 2 main lesson books here. One is the companion volume for teaching. This is going to be a tremendous resource because it's going to give you information about all of the different animals that are going to be talked about in the main lesson block. And I have sourced for you a ton of books that basically do what this book is going to do. The curriculum itself, Man and Animal, starts out really beautifully. You can see a lot of notes here because I've attempted to do my own version of this, and I had collected all of these resources for it to be more religious based. And then I realized that one of the, I should say, a very core principle in presenting this block is to identify the different aspects of animals that are in relation to the human being, versus we're just going to study an ant or a horse, but we're going to study first the human being. We're going to identify the parts of a human being. So we have our head, our torso, and our limbs. And then we're going to explore animals who exhibit an aspect of the human. But the first lesson, which I think is so brilliant, it talks about the human being, and granted, it's been a while since I've done this lesson, so I apologize if I am misspeaking and misrepresenting the curriculum, but when I presented it, we started with the human form, the human being. And I also want to say that as a religious family, while there are aspects of the human being that relate to animals, we are very separate from animals. And yes, people realize that we have a soul, something that separates us, the ability to make choices and decisions, and just the way our hands are constructed allows us to build things that separate from the way animals build things. And the fact that we are walking upright also frees our arms to do things that we might not otherwise be able to do if we were using all of our limbs for movement and transportation, for animals getting from one place to another. But from a religious perspective, I want to make it very clear for my students that we're not an extension of animal. There are parts of us that are like an animal, but we are created, we are human, we have been placed on this planet with a very specific purpose. And I want to keep that separate from in my opinion, minimizing the human experience as an extension of evolution and animal evolution, because we don't believe that as a family. So the first lesson talks about the human being, the head, the torso, the limbs, and we explore these different aspects, but we see that our hands are not used for movement, for transportation. Our hands are free. Our hands have the ability to give charity, to do for others, to be in service of humankind. And that aspect is exactly the kind of lessons that I want to instill with my children. And it's the exact kind of message that I want to have at the very beginning of the study of animals. I want there to be a recognition of the human, and by the human, I really mean the student, because at this age, the student is going through their own developmental changes where they are experiencing themselves separate from the world. And now we're going to experience ourselves and relate to the world at the same time. And we're going to see the parts that are similar, because we do have limbs and we do have a trunk, a torso, and we do have a head, and animals do too. So we're going to see the parts that are the same, and then we're going to see the most beautiful aspect, and that's the parts that are different. So the lessons are going to progress in a very specific manner, and that's why all of the work that I did to create my own lessons didn't land as well, because once we started, I realized that we're going to discuss animals that are primarily head animals. How is that possible? You look at a cuttlefish or an octopus and what you see is head. I know you see the tentacles, so you're like, oh wait, that looks more like a limb animal. But when you start to examine these animals, you realize that they fall into these different categories. Now, this is not the time quite yet to discuss, like say the anatomy and form in respect to the teeth, the jaw structure, the specificities of, like say the feet or the hooves. Those kinds of lessons are for middle school. And so we're not looking at those kinds of categorizations just yet. We're still looking at more, I'm going to say like an elevated, spiritual, separate way to look at the animal kingdom versus the typical kingdom classification that you're going to find with like species and family and class. And we're not going to actually do that just yet. That does have its place, and we are going to do that, but not just yet. So what if you want to do your own lessons? Well, the first thing I would say is that if you are going to construct your own lessons, your own main lesson block, and all of what I just said still sounds a little bit confusing, I would recommend getting the Charles Kovac's book, The Human Being and the Animal World, because this is going to be a really great resource so that you can create your own main lesson block. It's going to come with a ton of information, and it's also going to go through this sequence that still places the child, the human, first. So you're going to start with the trunk, head, and limbs, and then you're going to go into the cuttlefish. And in the Waldorf curriculum by Live Education, it does cuttlefish, and then it does octopus. And so I have books that relate to those lessons. But here that you'll find like the seal, the snail, all in part 1. Part 2 has the elephant and the horse. Oh, and I thought there would be another one. So you have this list of animals, which what I love about this book and what I love about the Waldorf main lesson block is that it has all the information you need specifically for the study of that animal, versus a lot of the books that I collect, even if they are, say, a book like this, Nature Anatomy, which is going to go over a number of animals, it's not going to have the depth that I need, the information that I want, and it's quite minimal. It's gorgeous, and the illustrations are fabulous, and I would totally use this, and I have used this as illustration inspiration, because this is just the kind of illustrations that I love to include. So I find this to be a really great resource, but not the only resource I would use for a main lesson block like this. It does have some, but not enough. I also have another resource that covers quite a bit of subject areas, and that is the ABCs of Nature. And this one is really extensive, and it is hard to find. So if you find it at a used bookstore, I would get it. It is a little bit outdated, but most of the information I found is still relevant. There are a couple of things that I found, like, oh, actually they've discovered this since this book has been published, and that was kind of neat to see some progression in this area of study. But what I love about this book is that it actually gives you a ton of information about the subject area. It does include some photographs that are now totally vintage, but what I love about it is that this is going to be a tremendous resource for a number of the animals that you want to study. And if you're going to be doing the botany main lesson block in the following year, we have used this book extensively for our botany unit as well. And so this would be, this kind of book is a great resource, but they are, I feel like they're a little bit harder to find with the information that I'm personally looking for. Another one of the Julia Rotham books, Ocean Anatomy, is beautifully illustrated. And again, you're going to find some of the animals that are talked about, like the cuttlefish, for instance, and the octopus. So those are in here, and this might have enough information, but honestly, I really needed a little bit more when we were presenting our lessons. But I find this a great resource for illustrations. And if you're going to be doing other lessons that address like oceanography or other plants and animals in the ocean, then this would be a really great resource. I really, really love these books, even though they haven't been as utilized as I hoped, considering the amount that's in it. But I would still like purchase this book again. If you want some stories to include with your opening activities, the Burgess Animal Book for Children might be a good choice. It does go through different animals, but in a really charming narrative story form. And we haven't finished this book, and there's another one that I believe that I started that's similar to this. It's great. It just didn't land well with our family and our kids, and it might be a little bit on the older side. I can't remember the publication. Let me see if I can find that for you. 1920 is the original publication. And yeah. So what I've noticed when we're doing books that are this classic, it is a little bit clearer, and I can't speak about this book in particular. I see it a little bit more in history books, for instance. You can see the biases coming through pretty strongly. You can see political motivations or religious motivations or just biases in general come through a lot clearer because it's been 100 years versus books that are published today where you are soaking in the bias yourself. You are less capable of seeing it. So a book like this, you might just chuckle at some of the things that are said. I can't speak specifically about this book, but in the past, when my children and I would be reading books that are 100 years old, approximately, we would just start to highlight all the things that are of humor for us or of clear bias and just, you know, point it out and just recognize it and then continue with the book. So this would be, I think, a really great opening activity book that you could read. And the chapters are not tremendously long, but it would still, for me, it would still take me a good 20 minutes to read these few pages, maybe even longer. I'm a little bit of a slow reader for read aloud especially. And it would be nice to have something that's a little bit more story driven. And if you're looking for more story-driven content, I have a number of picture books to share with you. This one's called Salmon Boy, and I will not be able to pronounce that in the indigenous language, but this is an indigenous tale. Pacific Northwest, even maybe up to Alaska. I can't remember the tribe, and there could be multiple tribes that have this story. The original Salmon Boy that I read, and it's been a while since I read this book, so I can't remember if this is the same story, but it is the story of the life cycle of a salmon and also the reverence that the indigenous people gave to the practices of hunting and fishing and gathering in general. Their practices were very spiritual, and this book is a beautiful story that illustrates that whole life cycle. And so this is a book that I would use as part of the main lesson when we talk about salmon or fish, or with my picture books. I love including them in our opening activities, which again is not necessarily a Waldorf practice, but we do really love our picture books. And I think that they serve multiple ages really well because usually, I mean, I'm homeschooling my last child at this point, so this is not as relevant for us at the moment. But in the past, when I would be homeschooling multiple children, I found that including picture books was a really great way to include all of my children, even though my children are 4 years apart in age. So I feel like this is even of more benefit if your children are closer in age, because picture books, I find, not all of them, but a lot of the ones that I particularly like to use are very informative. I love it if they're story driven. They're not always. Sometimes they're picture books, but they're more nonfiction and just informative. But I find them to be a great way to deliver information in a beautiful way, in a simple way, in a way that you can take complex ideas, and they're not dumbed down, because I really object to that style of teaching, but they're presented in an age-appropriate manner without the patronizing the student in a way that would otherwise be dumbing them down. So I love picture books for that reason. I have a few other picture books to share as well. We have Growing Up in Wild Horse Canyon, and this is going to serve a couple of different purposes for the 4th grade year. This is about horses, and I did a horse unit at one point with my daughter when she was really into them, and we sourced a number of books on horses, and you can find that complete video and the whole playlist. Actually, the link is in the description box below. We did a couple of projects for a horse unit, but I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 videos there, as well as all of the resources we used for that unit. And when we were collecting resources, I found it to be a really eye-opening unit to do on horses, because there's so much history and tradition mixed in, and political development, or politics and development mixed in with horses. And so this book is going to go through several years. it's going to have the theme of horses, but it's also going to be historical. And what's really great is that in the unit or the main lesson block on local geography, if you are in the States, because I live in California, so we would be covering local state history as well as US history in these early years. And this is a great book to add to that, because you're looking at history, you're looking at horses, and you're looking at indigenous people of this country. And this book has a little bit of all of that. So I really loved including this book. This would be its own almost separate resource from the man and animal unit, because it really takes you into a different direction. And if I were doing this, you know, this time around with all of these resources now that I have, I might consider doing this unit before I do the local geography unit and having this be at the tail end of the man and animal unit, or doing it the other way around. And when we are doing our geography and local industry unit, I might choose this book that could then be a nice segue into our man and animal unit. I have some more horse books to share with you, a little bit more horse books and a little more ocean books, like things on fish and octopus, because we did those units separately as well. So A Field Full of Horses, this is going to be just a fun little picture book. This would be great if you had like younger students with your 4th grade student, if you had preschoolers and kindergartners and 1st graders who are joining you during your read alouds and your picture book readings. This would be a really fun book to include. I really love the illustrations. They're just the kind of illustrations that I like. It's a very simple book. It's still informative, but it's just very simple. If you need something that's a little bit more nonfiction for horses, I've got a couple of books to share with you. This one is just Our Amazing World Horses, and by Kay De Silva. And this one's going to be the kind of book that you can definitely find at your local library. They're usually inexpensive. I mean, this one was just a few dollars, but it's paperback. But this is not something that I'm going to refer to often in our schoolroom or in our school. And so for that purpose, this would be a really great book to actually just check out from the library, because you may only need it once or twice, depending on what units you're doing, versus one of these picture books you could read often in your homeschool, and especially this one, which is really gorgeous. I love the illustrations on this one. This is one that you could be reading often in your homeschool as part of your opening activities or a bedtime story, versus something that's a little bit more nonfiction that you might only use for a very specific purpose. Seymour Simon, Horses, all about their strength, speed, their fowls, breeds, and more. And this one is going to be a little bit more extensive in your horse information and just aspects of breeds and a lot of things that I actually don't know about. Again, this is a book that you could definitely get from your local library. It wouldn't be this exact book if our horse unit was done more recently, so those resources are probably more readily available. But some of the units that I've done many years ago, those resources are not as readily available. And really, the reason why I'm showing you them is so that you can get an idea of the types of books to look for. Or if you find them at your local charity shop or thrift store, then that's great, because then you can probably find them for a really good price. But we're looking at like types of books or themes of books. So nonfiction versus a picture book versus, say, a historical fiction. So Album of Horses, this one is really nicely done and also very beautifully illustrated. For every chapter, you can see this really nice color illustration. I believe this is an older book. I cannot remember it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I'll check for you, just based on the illustrations and based on my memory of when we got this book. This book is from 1951. And what I liked about this book, and we didn't finish this book, this is where our bookmark is, so not quite half the book, but I do remember this book being sort of, it was like story driven. It was interesting. They were like these little mini storybooks with each chapter, but it focused on one breed of horse. And so you got to learn about that horse, and some are great for like industrial work, and not industrial work, like industrious, and other ones are great for riding, and some are great for speed, and they all have different purposes. And again, knowing very little about horses, I can't tell you too much, and I'm sure you or your children who love horses, have horses, can have an even better experience in bringing forth this aspect of the lesson. I have to say, and it is a sadness of mine that we are not around animals more, that we are not caretaking animals, that we don't have pets. Like, there is so much wisdom and so much wisdom that you can gain from that, so much experience that is transformative in caring for animals and pets, and we haven't, and I regret that we didn't have that experience. So this is another lovely book that it kind of is a departure from the man and animal main lesson block. This would be one if you were really into horses and you wanted to include a little bit more than what the curriculum would provide, then this would be a really beautiful resource. It would make great opening activity read-alouds to do as well. For your opening activities, you might also consider getting the Waldorf Book of Animal Poetry. This one goes through just about every animal and sometimes multiple poems about that animal. Some are short, some are long, some are great for young students, some are great for older students. And this has been a really great resource. We used it a lot for a couple of our units, and then we haven't used it much since. Again, my daughter is now 13, so we're really moving on to other resources at this point. And since she's my last homeschooler, there's a little bit of sadness of not using some of these resources again, unless I homeschool another child. Anyway, this will be a great resource for including poetry, which is fabulous with your main lesson blocks and fabulous as its own unit as well. But including poetry, I find to be a different relation with the information. It's not like a nonfiction, and I want to say it's more spiritual, but maybe that's not the right way to describe it either. But it touches a different part of your being when you are reading, reciting, or listening to poetry. And I love including that. And my understanding about poetry is that it should be recited. It's not something to be reading silently to yourself. And so reading it aloud as part of your opening activities, or reading one poem that relates to the animal that you're doing as part of that lesson, I think would be a really great addition to bring in the aspect of poetry into your lessons. Let's look at a couple other books that I have, and then we'll dive into our games, which are all the same, but of different categories. Lovely Beasts, The Surprising Truth. I liked this book for the illustrations, even though they're not typically the kind that I like. I actually really like the whole mood of this picture book. It's very serene. It feels a little bit on the reflective side. I love the colors. I love the way that it's presented, but it's not quite going to give you the content that you need for this particular main lesson block. Again, I would use this as part of your opening activities, because I love including picture books in our opening activities. And if you do too, this would be a great resource. If you are not inclined to include picture books in your opening activities, you might consider reading these ahead of time and presenting your own stories based on some of the books that you've read. Sometimes when I'm at a loss for my creativity, I start retelling books, movies, TV shows, experiences. I start retelling those as part of our stories in order to transmit a lesson and for enjoyment. I change a lot of things along the way, but sometimes I will do that when I'm at a loss for creativity, when I'm storytelling with my children. And in those cases, it's usually bedtime storytelling. Let's move on to some nonfiction books that are readily available, that you have probably seen, you probably own, and these are the DK Eyewitness books. I've got Fish and I've got Bird. Now, these books are, in my opinion, a little bit challenging to read through as a read aloud. I don't typically do that very often anymore. I just found through experience that we didn't retain a lot of information. It was a little bit challenging to get through, but I still keep a lot of them. I did get rid of a lot of my books for my DK Eyewitness books. I gave them to another homeschooler. However, I did keep some, and I will still purchase them for very specific reasons. Now, I do find them to be fairly informative. They do have a wide variety of information when you are looking at these specific topics. What I don't like about them, and some children love this, I happen to not care for the little captions and the little bits that are not part of the main paragraph. And in trying to read everything, we just get lost in it. So what I started to do more recently with books like this and with the DK Eyewitness books is that I'll just read the paragraph at the beginning of each 2-page spread, and then we can just get through our book a little bit more easily. What I do like about these kinds of books as well is that each 2-page spread is its own little collection. It's not necessary to read the book cover to cover. We could just focus on a particular part of this book and get the information. This also makes a great resource for you as the teacher in preparing your lessons. You can read this ahead of time and use that as the content for your lessons. Doesn't make such a great read aloud. What's also great about this book, which, you know, you could have mixed feelings about, but I think it's a great thing because I generally look for books with illustrations because that's what I really love. So I love that this book almost entirely is photographs because I don't usually look for books like this in general. And so the fact that this one does, then it kind of balances out all of the illustrated books that I have. What I find difficult of having just a book like this is that if you are going to be illustrating any of your lessons, personally, I find copying a photograph much more challenging than copying a drawing or a watercolor, and I find greater success in copying that than copying this. But this is going to have more detail because it's an actual photograph of the animal that you are studying. We also have it for birds because these are the different topic areas that you're going to be covering in the man and animal unit. And again, this one is very similar to the one on fish. So you're looking at photographs versus illustrations. You're looking at a lot of captions. You're looking at a ton of detailed information that may be too much and more than you need. So this kind of resource I would place this as a teacher resource versus anything that you would be presenting or reading aloud, I should say, to your students. We also have Humanimal. This one has, you know, I like these illustrations, even though they're not the ones that I typically go for because they are computer made, but I like this book, you know, the aspects of this book because I like the paper, I like the colors. Those things are not important for most people when they're buying books, but I sometimes do choose a book based on its cover, especially if it's a picture book. So this is another resource that's going to go over a wide variety of animals, and this may be enough information for what you're presenting. I usually find that I need to supplement a book like this with other books or just internet websites so that I can get enough information for a lesson that I'm presenting if I am not using a curriculum that already has all of the information for that specific animal. Because when you're looking at books that are going to cover a wide variety of animals, you may not get the content that you need. And then just getting a single book for an animal, I found that if it's like, say, farm animals, that's going to be easy to come by. But if you're looking for something really specific that's not common, like a sloth, for instance, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are. I haven't seen just a nonfiction book that's just going to cover that animal. And so having a resource like this could be enough for your lesson, or it might not be enough. So this book is going to go over a really unique way to look at the human-animal relationship. And I do think that it fits in some ways with the Waldorf curriculum, and in other ways, I feel like it doesn't quite align with the objective of the curriculum, because you're looking at aspects of the human world that are similar aspects of the animal world that are similar to humans in the emotional sense, not in the anatomical sense. So that might be something that you're like, oh, I really, really appreciate that look, that perspective. Or you might be like, well, that really doesn't align with our personal values, motivations for keeping the animal kingdom and the human kingdom separate in those aspects of humanizing animals, or the opposite way, because there is still a distinction between humans and animals. Okay, let's move on to some books on octopuses. And I've got 3 here, and that's because we did a unit on the ocean and a whole main lesson block on that. That's available on my website at pepperandpine.com if you're interested in looking into that. So we have the Owen Davey books. There are at least maybe 4, maybe more books that are in this series, and they're really great. I love the way that they're illustrated. I love the paper. Again, weird things to like about a book, but it has that sort of like dry, kind of rough paper quality. I don't like the kind that are kind of glossy and shiny. The pages are really thick. The illustrations are really great. The content is just right. Again, if there are too many little captions, I just end up reading like the main portions because I do get distracted by those little captions. This is just a really great book to include if you are going to be doing this main lesson block. This one, called Octopuses Strange and Wonderful by Lawrence Pringle, again, one book in a series of books that go over different animals. I really, really love this series of books as well. It starts off a little bit more, this is the kind of paper I don't care for, actually, but I still like this book series. It's going to start off with something that's a little bit more story-driven. At the beginning, it sort of engages you and intrigues you and captures you. And then it goes into things that are more scientific and nonfiction, which can get a little bit heavy at times and maybe too detailed. And then it goes back to being more like a story. So I really, really like this series. I like the way that they're illustrated. It's a little bit more of the older type of illustrations. So it's a lot more books I feel are moving in this direction. So if you're not into this look, which is a little bit vintage now, then you might consider just doing the Obsessive About Octopus book. And then if you want one that's a little bit more story driven, this book is the book that you could use for your opening activities. And it's also just so brightly illustrated. This would not be enough to give you content for your lesson. This would just be, I would use this as part of my opening activities. Okay, so for opening activities, I have 3 Professor Noggin's games, but because there are such a variety of animals that are being covered in this unit, you could also use the horses, Professor Noggins. There's also the rainforest, Professor Noggins, that could also address some of the other animals that we've covered. And then we have birds, life on the farm, and life in the ocean. So let me just show you the birds Professor Noggins game. This is a game, this series of games, and there are several available, at least 20, probably more. The format for this game is trivia based, and so this would work best if you have some familiarity with the subject area, or you're doing this towards the end of your unit, or you're using this in the unit that follows in order to keep some of that trivia alive as you move on to other subject areas. But it comes with 3 questions that are easy and 3 questions that are hard, and an illustration on the front cover. They have updated a lot of the series, and so the front cover will be a photograph, and then the questions are in the vertical format rather than in the horizontal format, but they still have an easy and a hard question. There is a dice that comes with the game. We actually never use it because we just go like in order. We'll just ask the first question. We usually start with the easy questions, and we don't play the whole deck at one time. Just there are so many cards. We will maybe just do 5 per student, and then we'll ask each other the questions. And then if we get them right, we'll keep the card and kind of add up at the end who got the most cards. And it's just a really fun way to start off our unit or start off our day with our opening activities. And you can make this a 5-minute game. You can make this an hour game, depending on how many cards you want to play and how much information you know. Since there are not more than 6 questions, sometimes there's like a Noggin's choice, but because there are not more than 6 questions per card, if you're playing this really, really, really often within one unit, you probably will exhaust all the questions, and then you know, the game is obsolete until you can put it aside and kind of forget some of the questions. So that's the only downside, is that if you're playing the game so much that you've like memorized all of the questions and answers, then you'll have to come up with your own cards and make your own illustrations and write your own questions on the back. And we've done that before, and it's fabulous. And you can find a few of those examples in the description box below. I've linked some of the our own trivia cards that we've made, which are so much fun, really beautiful, and actually really help synthesize the information that you're learning, because you have to learn the information and process it and then come up with questions. My kids it really taught them, or rather it really showed me how much they learned, and it really encouraged them to have a better understanding of the content, because they had to come up with their own questions, whether it was a fill in the blank or an open-ended question or a multiple choice question, and then they had to include the answer as well. And I really, really loved those projects that we did. The ocean, Professor Noggins, is similar, just ocean-based, so illustrations for the ocean. And then the one that we've played the least is Life on the Farm, and this one has animals or other things that you would find on the farm. And again, you have the same format for the questions on the back. I think that's everything, or at least most of it. There are still more books in our homeschool library that address these different topics. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we are exploring the Waldorf curriculum for grade 4. I'm sharing with you a lot of the books and resources that you can add to the curriculum, or if you'd like, you can use these resources to create your own main lesson blocks. Although once you see all of the resources I've collected, it might just be easier to buy the curriculum. So we've already gone through the introduction of the 4th year. You can find all of these videos down in the description box below. You can also find the video where I review the entire curriculum. That one is also available. We also went over teaching grammar with imagination and all of the additional grammar resources that I shared with you. Imaginative math and fractions. I went over this main lesson block as well, and you can find additional math videos on my website and in the description box below. We went through the history selections, which for grade 4 are folk tales and mythologies and epic poems. So we have the Norse Myths, we have Beowulf, and we have the Kalevala. We already covered the man and animal block, which you can consider a zoology block, but when you understand the Waldorf approach, you'll see how unique it approaches this particular aspect of zoology, because it starts with the human, the person, the child first, and then goes through the different aspects of the human form, and then relates it to the animals that specifically relate to that form. So it's not about the classifications, the kingdom, the species, the families. We're not doing any of that at the moment. That's saved for later. But this kind of exploration is beautiful, and I love how it starts with the person first. So there were 3 main lesson books that coordinate with that main lesson block, and it includes the Drawing Simple Animal Forms, which is so helpful if you are new to drawing or you just need a little more assistance, because we are going to be drawing animals in that unit. But today we are going over local geography, history, and industry. And this main lesson block is going to be quite a bit shorter, or rather I should say there isn't going to be that many lessons available in this particular main lesson block, because you're going to have to come up with a lot of the material, because this is very personal. It depends on where you live and the geography of the area that you live. And I'm in Southern California, and so that's also going to include indigenous people of the area, which I have some resources to share with you. And then the industry part is really interesting, and I'm going to share with you a couple of resources that you might use in some ways to figure out what the industry is for your area if you don't already know. So this main lesson block is going to include some ideas on what you can do with your child, bearing in mind that the 4th grade child, so around the age of 10, is not going to be able to understand geography and geology and even some aspects of industry and even aspects of history, the way that a traditional curriculum might expose the child to those topics. So the detailed map drawing, even though I'm sharing with you some atlases, those aren't necessarily for the student. That's more for you to have a better understanding of your location and the industry in your location, and the map for your understanding. The way the child is going to be drawing maps is going to be different. Here's an example. So it's going to be slightly more imaginative. You do want them to get a bearing of their street, their neighborhood, if they're walking to the park or the local grocery store. You want them to have those markers available for them. And if you're driving around town, I'm not sure if you remember doing this as a child, but I had like a general idea of where things were. And if I ended up you know, together, if we were on the other side of town, I kind of knew at least the direction of how to get home, even if I didn't know all the names of the streets. And then when I was a child of 11, I was a paper girl. They don't really have that profession anymore, but I would go around in my neighborhood on my bike and I would deliver the paper. And I got to know my neighborhood really well, and I knew all the names of the streets in my neighborhood. And I find that to be so interesting because as an adult, because I rely on a form of navigation, I know the names of the streets in my neighborhood pretty much not at all, and in my town a lot less, because I'm not using those skills that I needed when I was a child, which is such a curiosity. So this book is going to go over some examples of what you can do, the amount of time to spend on this main lesson block. It's going to have some really good information about maps. And even though I'm sharing with you some resources that you wouldn't necessarily use with the child, I do want to point out that we're not looking for the details of map making at this age. And also, when you're looking at geography, geology, history, we are looking at something that's going to be very specific for the 10-year-old child, that's going to suit that child's needs and his or her development. So that child, and I go over the development a lot more in the first video in this series, and on the blog post that accompanies this video, I do write it all out to the best of my knowledge and ability with my understanding about the development of the 10-year-old child. And this is a time when there's a separation between them and the world. Their inner world and their outer world is kind of clashing a little bit. They did not have this separation before. There's a bit of a grief process as well when you are, in a way, saying goodbye to your childhood, or at least the childhood that you understood before. Time starts to speed up at this point. Before this, time was, in a sense, it felt eternal. Children really lived in the present. At this point, the child, starting at around grade 3, they understand that they have a past. Usually that's when past tense is taught. If it's not in 3rd grade, then 4th grade, if you're teaching past tense, that's really going to start to make sense to a child because they finally can understand their past, relate to having a past. And that whole bit of a turmoil moment comes together at this age. And so the aspects of history that are maybe not necessary for that student at this age are the things that relate to, say, legal, political geography, even some aspects of human rights and prevailing laws and legal systems, especially the ones that integrate with political and geographical boundaries, trade agreements, and all of these things. That's best left for an older student. I want to also just say that you may, as a family, have different opinions and you may have different experiences that you want to share with your child. Absolutely, as an individual, as a family, you can certainly do those things. The reason why I share about the development of the child is that even if you're doing those things with your child, they will have to come to terms with and rectify and understand those concepts anyway, at a later time when they're developmentally ready for it, when they're more mature, maybe even post-puberty. So all of the things that you're doing with them younger, if it's not landing very well, or you think, oh my goodness, they're going to dive into this career later on because they're so enthusiastic about it as a child, just understand that they will go through these different stages. They will develop. They will have to revisit all of this information. If you present it too early, they will have to revisit it when they are developmentally ready. It's not to say that you still can't do it. I just want to put it out there that that is why some of these things, these lessons, hold back a little bit on some of the material that's being delivered. But the things that you do want to spend time with, I just highlighted the first couple of sentences of this paragraph, the study of the cultural geography, the customs, the way of life, the rituals and festivals, belief systems, food, clothing, ideals, arts, crafts, etc. That's the part that a child can really relate to and makes the most sense for them in relating themselves to others, relating their world to other, like the other world. Like say, if you are studying the geography of your area, you want to keep it where it's something that they can see and observe and relate to in comparison to, like, say, their own neighborhood, or just having an understanding of, hey, my city is made up of like a lot of trees, or we have rivers flowing through the center of town, or something along those lines, where they have like a relationship with the geography of the area. And then, of course, the customs and the way of life, that studying that, I should say, for their area and for peoples of other areas, that builds understanding for people of other areas or people of the past. And it gives you a sense of knowing, appreciation, compassion, tolerance, and noticing the differences between other people and themselves, other cultures and themselves. Okay, let's go on to some of the resources that I have for you. Now, I am sharing things that relate specifically to California and to the United States, as well as some native tribes in California. And some of these projects that I have for you aren't for native tribes in California that I know of. Some of the projects that I share on the website, I have learned from either Native Americans who shared their crafts or their wisdom, or they were selling their crafts. And so some of those, like for instance, for this, which basket weaving is in many tribes, many cultures, and this is a very basic example, but depending on the tribe, the way that this is gathered together, there's different shapes that can be created. So here you can see that there's no rhyme or reason to the way that this was put together. However, if you are seeing larger baskets or even small ones, you'll see more detail in the way that it is woven together, the way that the raffia is collected and shaped. That can be very indicative of, say, a person's craft, like an individual artisan's craft style, or it can include maybe tribal styles or regional styles. It could include even certain shapes, even colors. This is just a very basic example of that, but you'll find a lot of uniqueness as you go, as you dive deeper into these different arts. I'm doing things that are very basic and achievable with a child of about 10 years old. So Geology Underfoot in Southern California. This is a new book for me. Actually, we got this for our geology unit, which is a little bit later in the years. And I'm sharing this with you for this grade so that you, as the teacher parent, can understand and explore, and this one actually has it for other areas too, but can understand and hopefully explore some of the geological formations of your area, and hopefully you can get a little background information on it, and not that you have to give all of this information to your child, but so that you are familiar with it as you go to these different places. And hopefully you can find some places that are really nearby. For me, California is quite a big state, and so I'm hoping to find a few things that are nearby, especially with the beaches, to to showcase that to my children and hopefully have a little bit of background information so that if questions do come up, or if I do have the opportunity to point out certain aspects of the formations, then I have some things to say about it. So they have them for other areas as well too, so I encourage you to check that out. Welcome to California. We got this book as part of our California unit study, and it's sweet, it's cute. It goes over some of like the state flower and some cities that have very iconic attractions, and some aspects of the like the geography, and or not the geography, more the geology, or maybe like the trees and the animals and the flowers, those kinds of things, and the food and a bit of culture. So this was like a cutesy book. This is a kind of book that I would include in an opening activity. This doesn't really match the kind of vibe of homeschooling I typically go for. I was looking for some very specific topic books, rather than the way that I choose books is really by illustrations and kind of a whole feel of the book. And this is more for content, and even the content's a little bit more on the minimal side. And so for that purpose, I would just include this as an opening activity. And once again, books aren't typically used as opening activities in a Waldorf setting. Maybe storytelling is a little bit more what you would expect in a Waldorf school. In our homeschool, we tend to use a lot of picture books, and so I have a lot of those to show for you. John Sutter, a California pioneer. The reading level for this book is right around, I think, 4th grade, 5th grade, maybe 3rd grade. And this is still not a book that I would necessarily give to my child to read on his or her own. This is a book that I would read aloud, and I would just include it as part of our main lesson, and maybe even include reading a couple of pages daily as part of our opening activities, especially if we were doing, like, say, another project that took up a little more time. I would just read a little bit of this at a time, because reading it from cover to cover, I feel is way too much information. And if you had the time, I would recommend that you just read this ahead of time and just deliver your lesson with a few points. To be honest, I rarely had the time to do that with 4 kids and, you know, homeschooling multiple kids and a home and all the other things that life has for you. So I rarely pre-read my lessons, but having homeschooled for many years, now I can just draw on my stories and the information that I've gathered over these 20 plus years of homeschooling. So sometimes I can do that, but I wasn't ever able to do that right when I first started homeschooling. We also have gold from the American River, because we had a gold rush in California. So this is something else that you could include if you wanted to. And this kind of goes into a little bit of the industry of the past. And then I honestly don't know how much you'd want to travel into present day industry, because where we live in California, there's a lot that we can discuss as far as industry. It's really up to you. I don't know the value of doing historical industry versus present day industry, other than keeping it very relatable to the child. So this is another book that it's quite lengthy, but I think it's more story driven. It's been many years since we put together our California unit, so I would do this. For picture books that are more story driven, I wouldn't mind doing them. Even a book this size, all in like 1 or 2 or 3 days, versus a book like this, which is also a picture book, but it's nonfiction. And this is probably nonfiction also, or historical fiction maybe. But a book like this that has a lot more content and information, I would rather split that up over several days. A book that's more enjoyable, a little bit more of a story form, I wouldn't mind spending the time to read it all in one day, because I feel like these kinds of books are really engaging, and I don't mind spending extra time for an engaging book like this versus a book like this that you would need a few days to process the information. And again, I would be really very selective about the information that I was giving if I was trying to stay more in line with the Waldorf approach for 4th grade. In the past, when I was homeschooling multiple children, I wouldn't mind going through a book like this and having this much information, because likely I had an older student and a younger student, and the younger student probably was playing and only got, a few words here and there, and the older student probably this was the right amount of content, and the other student, maybe somewhere in between the older and the younger student, maybe this was the grade level, but they only needed a little bit, because the purpose of grade 4 was not the same as, say, grade 7. Okay, let's go on to California sights and symbols, and this would be something that you might consider getting if you want a little more help with your illustrations. Not that you as a teacher, parent, have to do illustrations for all of the main lessons. I find that I've gone through different phases with my children as far as how I present the artistic portion of the lesson. Sometimes it was more on the chalkboard, especially if I had more than one child. Now that I'm like homeschooling more than one child, now that I'm just homeschooling the one child, I end up sitting next to her and using a main lesson book and doing an illustration next to her rather than something on the chalkboard, or giving her a piece of like a material, a piece of work for her to copy. So this is a very easy book for you to use. And also I found that I have a few different kinds of books like this where it has to do with drawing and the step-by-step process of drawing. My kids on occasion have really loved it. I have 4 children. I think one of them really took to a book like this, and so he would just use it on his own and learn how to draw whatever figures were in the book. And this might be, you might have a child that's like that and would enjoy that that process. California Gold Rush. This is a social studies activity book. This is for grades 4 to 7 in traditional school. The reason why I'm sharing with you this book, because as you have seen or will see, I share a variety of materials. Some of them are definitely Waldorf, other things are Waldorf inspired, and other things are pretty much not Waldorf at all. But what I like to do with some of these materials is take from it ideas, or take from it a single worksheet, or take from it maybe a little bit of content to put together my lessons. And while we don't typically use worksheets as part of our main lesson, I do use them as part of our daily work, and primarily in math and language arts, and usually a workbook that's 1 or 2 or even 3 grade levels behind where my children are, so that it is practice work, it is proficiency work, it is reviewing skills and information to keep those skills sharp. So I usually use workbooks in that capacity. This might be something where you need a little bit of busy work for your child that works with the grade level and the content, because you are busy with another child or you are preparing for the lesson. And that's why I like including these books. So as you can see, they're all blank because the children did not use this as a workbook, but we did buy it when we were doing our California unit study. And this would be something that I would either use during the 4th grade year if I needed some content that related, or I would use it a year or 2 later when my child was 5th or 6th grade as part of their daily work, included in their daily work. And daily work for me is a little bit of busy work, and also primarily to sharpen skills from the lessons that we've done in the past. California, Here We Come. This is a book I picked up from the library bookstore. I picked it up because it related to the unit study that we were doing. It has the illustrations that I'm more inclined towards, but I definitely don't care for them too much. But what I like about this book is that it did cover some really big historical topics, some geographical locations and what you might find there. And so it fit the content that I wanted, but this would be something that I might just use 1 page as part of my opening activities, or I would read this and include it in some capacity during the lesson, like our main lesson. But this is definitely not a book. I don't think this is a book that I would read cover to cover, but you never know. You might really get into it and the children might really be engaged. But this is another kind of, or a type of book that I like including for our opening activities. Then we can do kind of a variety of things. Like we could do one page and maybe 1 workbook page, and then we could do, say, a couple of pages of a book like this, and that would round out our opening activities with a little bit of mental math and maybe a geography game, which could be questionable if you want to stick more closely to the Waldorf approach. But that would be a way that you could include some other things into your opening activities. You might have your child do some of their basket weaving while you are doing your opening activities if it's something that you are reading aloud, or they could be working on their basket weaving. It depends on what kind of child you have and your preferences while you're doing the main lesson. I also have some clay here. So this is something else that you could be working with to make pottery. You could get a kit, or you could buy this. This is what we have left. This is maybe like 4 pounds of a 25-pound block of clay that we've used extensively with lots of different projects. So this is just another book that you could include, and just the way that you could include it. I'm just sharing some of the things that we've done in the past. Song of the Swallows. This has to do with the missions in California, and I think this has to do with the San Juan Capistrano mission. So that mission is based in Southern California, and so the reason why we got this one is specifically because it's something that's somewhat local in Southern California, and this works really well with the a California unit, or with this unit if you wanted to include a picture book like this. And I'm thinking that it depends on where you're living, of course, because this would not relate to everyone. You could still use this even if you were in another state, if you wanted to study California history, the missions in California, but we got it specifically for our California unit. Keepers of the Earth, Native American Stories and Environmental Activities for Children. This is going to have a lot in store for you, and this will be something that you would definitely be using as a teacher to prepare your lessons, and it comes with activities that you could incorporate based on the story that you're reading. So this is going to be a tremendous resource for studying the indigenous people of the United States, and I think into Canada as well, but I'm actually not 100% sure how many tribes this book covers. Okay, so we have an atlas and this book called Maps, and I want to share them with you primarily because you'll notice in the maps that now I forgot. Now I forgot what page. Oh, I completely passed it over. Let's go to. That's northeastern United States, southern United States, central, western. Here we go. The reason why I included this book, and this is an atlas that we've used before with other units, other main lesson blocks, and primarily with my older students, pretty much never with middle elementary or younger. But this book will have, and this is a little bit dated, that computer's dated, but I hope that you can see that okay. But it's going to show you some of the industry and some of the icons of your state or your area. And if you don't know yourself, this might be a little indication, a little help for you to explore those topics with your child. And the reason why I would say something like this versus just going on the internet and saying, like, what are the industries of my area, is because these are going to give you more iconic industries. And I feel like for a child, those are going to be a little bit more relatable and a little bit more visual. And that's just my opinion, but I could be really off target with that one. But this might be helpful for you, and also just for your own understanding of the geography of your area and the types of things you might find. This might be helpful. I'm pretty sure this is a dated atlas. I would definitely recommend on getting a current one. That's probably going to be a little bit more helpful than sourcing a used older book. This is a new resource, new-ish resource for us. It's called Maps, and it was in line with a number of books that we purchased several years ago that have this similar large format, similar types of illustrations, similar paper type, which I'm really big into the type of paper for books. I like the kind that's a little bit rougher. It's like, I don't like the glossy paper. It's nice and thick. It just feels like really good quality for me. And the reason why this book would also be a help for you is because I think this time I remember the right page number. No, I didn't. Then I'll just show you oh, here we go. The reason why I liked this book or these types of books is, again, you're going to have the same kind of large iconic pictures that illustrate the different industries or say iconic sites for the state. And I feel like this is really helpful in getting, say, a bird's eye view of what each of these states would provide. And we would just focus on the state that we're at. And maybe if we were traveling to another state, a road trip, for instance, we might include some of the icons of that area, some of the industry of that area when it made sense for the child and it related to the child because of, say, travel, or maybe grandma lives in another state and we're talking about something in that state, you know, something that can still relate to the child. So this is a really gorgeous book that I would say if you were going to be using it for your other lessons in the future, then definitely invest in something like this. It's so gorgeous. I love the illustrations. I love the whole color and vibe of the book, and I'm pretty sure, although I can't confirm, but this one is much older, so this one might be a little bit better as far as accuracy because it is more recently published. Let's look at a couple of games that you could include for your opening activities or any time in your lessons. Now these ones are going to be literally geography games, so you may decide not to do that because they are going to they may not be as relatable, I suppose. So this one, what I like about these are the Professor Noggins games, and what I like about the old version is that they are illustrated versus photographs, and you can I just think that the photographs are really great. So it's going to go through the geography of the United States, and on one side you have these really gorgeous illustrations, and then on the flip side you have questions, and you have easy questions and hard questions, and you have a dice, which we pretty much never use. We'll just go over and we'll just ask like we'll go in order basically and ask the first question. And the way that we will play it is we'll just divide up maybe 5 cards or 8 cards each, and then we will ask the other person those questions. Sometimes my children will actually pick the cards that they want to be asked the questions of, and then we will just do a few so that it doesn't, if you went through the whole deck, it would take you like 30-45 minutes. So we'll just do a few at a time. We try to keep it under 10 or 15 minutes. And that way it's really fun to do this as part of your opening activities. Because it's trivia based, it usually doesn't work so well if you don't have any information about the topic area. And so something like this, even though I'm sharing it with you with this unit, or this main lesson block rather, you still might not be able to utilize this until you've learned a little bit about your state or your industry. And so you might consider making your own trivia-based cards, which are even better than the ones that you buy, because it really synthesizes all the information that the child has learned. And you could do this together with your child. You could work on it together, and they have to come up with their questions, or you could do that together and the answers. And I feel like that's even better than using a game like this. And then when you move on to your other units, then you can use the game that you made in your previous units. We have 10 days in the USA, and I'm pretty sure this game is not available unless you're finding it on eBay for like $100. It's crazy. I'm going to show it to you anyway because we have 4 in this series. We love it so much. This one got the most love, and it's a geography game. So again, if you're not looking to do something that's this detailed, which is not usually advisable for the 4th grade student as far as my understanding, but we have really, really loved it. And we've been playing this game for so many years, even when the kids were like young. And I feel like it really gave us a good sense of the geography of the United States without having to study it specifically. We just knew in general where things were. I have to say that we probably couldn't, if we just like erased all of the names and tried to put them on, we would still need to study to make sure that we got all of the names of the states in the right place. But as far as like general knowledge of geography, this was a really great game. So it comes with the cards and the transportation cards, and you just try to get 10 days of connecting different states or flying to different states depending on the color of the airplane, etc. It's a lot of fun to play. I'm really sorry if you do not have this game and you want it because it is no longer in print. I tried, the company was sold to another company, and then just, it's too bad. But you can find alternatives to this game, and the name escapes me now. I think something with the train and something with the United States, and I cannot remember the name of the game, but there are other geography games that you might include if you want to go in that angle, or in that direction rather. I have a couple of kits to share with you. Now, we have done some of these things just by sourcing our own materials and also getting them as kits, and also getting them when we were in a Waldorf conference where we used this kind of wood for basket making. And then this is the raffia that you can use to connect your pine needles. And then included in here are pine needles that we source just through our neighborhood and other areas, and the longer ones are easier to work with than the shorter ones. And I do not remember the variety of tree where you're going to find the longer ones versus the shorter ones, but that does make a huge difference. So try to source the longer ones if you can. That's the kind that I believe will make the basket weaving even better. And you can weave other things, like this is a type of well, actually I don't remember what it is exactly, but it's wood of some kind, or twig, or it's botanical of some kind. And so you can weave other things. You can even get sticks, a bunch of sticks, and you could weave baskets from sticks as well. But if you would rather get a kit, which I love kits, here are two. They are from A Child's Dream. And of course, everything that I'm sharing with you is linked on the blog post that accompanies this video. And that link is down in the description box below. This one's called Twined Basket Kit. And this is the gathering style. We have not done this kit, or this style, but this is one that has everything included. I do not remember the ages for this one, but my experience is that even if a child of 10 can do a project like this, they generally need a lot of assistance and help, especially when they start to do something wrong and you have to come in and help them undo that, or they just need a lot of help getting started. I just noticed that this was generally, these kinds of crafts were a little bit more labor intensive, in the sense that I needed to be there to help throughout the project versus other projects where my kids could do it on their own. These ones were not one of them. Pottery kit. This is the Pueblo style, and this comes with everything you need for this kit, or to make these bowls. And that I really like these kinds of things where it's going to be included, it's going to have the directions. You don't have to worry about sourcing your own materials, but if you did want to source your own materials, this is clay from Aardvark clay. This is what we have left. They come in 25-pound bags. They had different cone numbers. I didn't worry about the different cone numbers because we are not firing this clay. And because we're not firing the clay, it is more prone to cracking. So you do want to be mindful of making your projects. I found that if I made them a little bit thicker, they weren't prone to cracking and breaking entirely. Even if they dried and shrank a little bit, they didn't completely break. So that's something that you might want to consider if you wanted to do your own projects and source your own materials. This would be a great option. Hi everybody, my name is Hannah. This is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series of videos where we are exploring grade 4 using our Waldorf curriculum with additional books and resources for each of these main lesson blocks. So we've already gone through almost the whole curriculum, and you can find the complete playlist listed in the description box below. You can also find all of these materials, links to these resources on the blog post that accompanies this video. That's on my website at pepperandpine.com, and you can find that link down in the description box below. So we've already gone through the introduction of the 4th year, where we talk about the development of the child. That video is also listed below, as well as the video where I review the entire 4th grade curriculum. So we've already gone through this one. We've already explored our grammar resources, which include resources that are non-Waldorf as well. We've already gone through our imaginative math and fractions, and I do have other videos on math on my YouTube channel as well as on my blog post. And then we went through our history resources for this grade, which are the folk tales and the mythologies and epic poems. So we have the Kalevala, we have Beowulf, and we have the Norse Myths. We went through the zoology block, which is the man and animal block, and I shared with you so many books that you can use in order to put together your own main lesson lesson block, or books that you can use to supplement the curriculum. But honestly, it comes with the companion volume, and this is going to include all of the stories that you can use for your man and animal block. And it also comes with drawing simple animal forms so that you can be prepared to draw some of these different animals for the main lesson block. And then we went through local geography, history, and industry, and this will be the smallest block, although it's not the shortest block, but it's the smallest in resources because this one is based on your location and your geography and your local industry and history. So this is an opportunity for you to definitely collect other books and resources to put together that main lesson block. What you're not going to find is a handwork main lesson block or a eurythmy main lesson block, or honestly, any of the other lessons that you would have in a Waldorf school, which would include foreign language and music. Later on, there would be drama and woodworking and metalworking and other classes as well. But I do want to share with you some of the resources that I have used in order to do the handwork throughout the grades. And I encourage you to check out some of the websites that are listed below and on my website as well for other resources for handwork classes and other handwork videos, so that you can have those resources available for you as you are putting together your main lesson block on handwork, which is not actually a main lesson block. Handwork is usually done daily or at least a couple of times a week. I tend to like to do our handwork in the afternoon or when I'm reading aloud. So we tend to do more handwork in the winter because we do our history units in the winter. And it's just a great, just cozy time to do our knitting or other handwork, especially while I'm reading aloud, which I do a lot more in the winter time because of our history units. And you can do this, of course, throughout the year. I just noticed that we have more of a stronger collection of projects that are completed in the winter. I also want to share with you a couple of resources that I have for eurythmy, and you can now find more eurythmy classes and just the idea of what eurythmy is online. It used to be very difficult, and so I want to share with you, we have one of the balls that you would use in eurythmy, and I believe 4th grade is the time when you would be using one of these balls. I actually can't recall. There's also the felted ball, and then definitely in 4th grade, you will have the bars, and I actually don't remember what they're technically called. They are made from copper. These ones were gifted to me by my sister who made them. You can easily make these from materials that you would find at the hardware store. These ones are pretty pricey, and you usually only find them at Waldorf supply stores, and they're hammered. They're gorgeous. You could use other weighted balls as well, and you could use your felted ball if you had one, or you can make one as well. And then these ones are definitely used in grade 4 with eurythmy, and generally eurythmy is done in groups, but I have seen some really great options and tutorials where you could do this just with one child or with you and your child. But especially in grade 4, when you are doing movements that are best done with other students or in unison, or when you're seeing each of the children go through different positions to form like a square, for instance, that's really best done with other students. You can either do them, with all of your children, even if they're not in grade 4, or collect a few other students who are in that grade and see if they would like to participate in some of those activities. This is one lesson that I have done, or rather one aspect of Waldorf that I have done far more than my children have done. I have loved it every time I've done it. I have wished that I could have included it more with my children, and I haven't, even though we do have some of the materials for it. Just want to share that with you and encourage you, if you were on the fence about it, I encourage you to try it out. And now that there are so many more options and resources available online, it makes it so much easier to try this out. So these are the 2 bars that you would find in grade 4. There's also the weighted ball, the hammered ball. I don't remember the names given for all of the all of the materials for eurythmy. There's also a specific dress that's advised, and types of shoes, and there's a lot that goes into it. I'm just giving you barely even scratching the surface. Pretty much just the name eurythmy, and encouraging you to check it out a little bit more. So we do have our felted balls, and so if you didn't have those other materials, you might consider starting with a felted ball that you can then use in your eurythmy. These are two projects that you might find in grade 4, and this is a ball that we felted, or wet felted, and this is a ball that we bought, and both of them are projects that I did at a Waldorf conference. And this one was several days to complete the project because we started by wet felting the ball, and it was smaller than this. And one thing that I realized after I started this project, which we did at the same type of Waldorf conference just many years later, this one was purchased from Trader Joe's at a time when they had the wool, I'm not sure if they still have them, but at the time when they had the wool balls for dryer, they were dryer balls. And what I realized as we were working through this project is that these dryer balls are much harder to work on and work through with your needles and your embroidery thread. So if you were considering that as a hack, like as an option instead of making them, I would encourage you not to do that. I would encourage you to make them instead. They're smaller, so you can finish the project more easily, and they're softer. These ones are softer. It doesn't seem like they're that much softer, but it's pretty significant once you start embroidering. These ones are much easier to embroider on. So these are some of the projects that you might find in grade 4. I love them because they're multi-week projects. So it's something you really need time to invest in. And because there's so many aspects to the project, you really get a good sense of accomplishment when you're done. So you start out with the wet felting, and I do have tutorials. They're listed in the blog post that accompanies this video, as well as on the playlist that this video is included in, and those links are in the description box below. You could also find a kit to do the felted crafts if you wanted to as well. Otherwise, doing a felted ball is not complicated necessarily. It does take a little bit of time. It does take materials that maybe aren't readily available if you're not used to buying Waldorf handwork materials, and it's a bit messy. So the way that we used to do it is we would actually just set up in this space. You need a couple of bowls with warm water, cold water, soapy water, and you just, it's great for your hands. It's great for children. It's just a little bit messy, but you start off by, really working the ball with the wool until it gets nice and tight and really compact. And then you have to bounce it around until it really get all that moisture out. And then it takes time for your ball to dry. So this is already, a few weeks since you're just working it a little bit, a few times a week, let's say. We tended to do this, the majority of it in one day, like making the felted ball all in one day. Then it took several days to dry, and then you can start on your embroidery, but you want to make sure that it's completely dry to begin with. One little hack that I can share with you is that over the years of working with handwork projects, I would keep my scraps. So scraps of wool batting, scraps of wool yarn, and I keep them in a little box. And then when we got ready to do a project like this, I would just take a bunch of that and kind of twine it together or wind it together and just kind of get it nice and compact. And then that would become the core of the ball, and then I would wrap the wool around it. And at least we were starting with something that was a little bit more firm, and it was a great way to use up just our scraps that we had collected over the years. So this is a kit. I'm not sure that this kit is still available, but kits like this are super great because then you don't need to source all of your materials individually. And so this one is specifically for ribbon balls, but it's going to come with your wool, it's going to come with your ribbon, which is really great, and it's going to come with directions and your soap and a few other items, which is fabulous if you don't want to buy all of these materials individually. If you do, I usually get my things from A Child's Dream. That link is in the description box below, and you can source your own colors, and then otherwise you just need some soap. So it's pretty simple materials. The ribbon ball is a little bit different though. We haven't made the ribbon ball specifically, and maybe we did and I can't remember. I apologize for that, but I know that I don't have a tutorial for the ribbon ball. When you get ready to embroider your work, you can get some embroidery floss. There are different types and thicknesses and materials, and I know less about those details than just the fact that you can use embroidery floss for these projects that you're going to be doing in 4th grade. There is the kind that is, not this one actually, because this one will end up being a little bit harder to use than the one that's woven, because these ones split apart into separate threads. And this is the kind that I typically use for myself, but a grade 4 student will have a better time using the kind that is woven, and I think I'm sorry, not woven, I think it's called pearl. And that way the threads stay together more easily. So this is an example of, let's see, here's an example of the, I believe, yes, this is the kind that the grade 4 student would be using, and you can see how it's one thread, but it's woven together, so it's two, I believe. And this is a lot easier for the student to use rather than this kind, which is basically 4 or 6 different threads sort of just twisted together, and these are harder for the grade 4 student to use. So when you're doing balls like this, I would recommend using this thicker kind, and then you will need embroidery scissors, and these ones are, I believe these ones are the embroidery, and these are the cross stitch, which I will share with you the projects that you can do with cross stitch. The cross stitch needle is a little bit bigger, and this one's, I think this one's a little bit smaller, not by much. This one is size 22, and this one is size 20. And this is a project that you can also do in grade 4. This is a project, I think most of the projects I'm sharing with you today are projects that I've done at Waldorf conferences or Waldorf Handwork conferences. And if you're interested in taking a class or attending the conference, that link is also in the description box below, and I highly recommend that you try one of their classes, because especially if you don't know anything at all and you're a little bit worried to include this aspect of Waldorf into your homeschool, taking just one of those classes will give you the confidence and the skills to at least begin and do a few projects, and it's just fabulous. And I feel like the kids feel very accomplished with their projects, and honestly, these are projects that we still have in our homeschool room that the children can see and use for many, many years. So this is a sewing roll. Let me remove these so that you can see this a little bit better. And this would be an activity that you would do in grade 4 that includes sewing, like just some hand stitching. And then I learned that this is called a twizzle. I mean, it could have a technical term that I'm not aware of. And then it includes a little bit of felt so you can put your needles. And then it includes the embroidery, which is a really big part of grade 4. And the initials, that's supposed to be an H. It looks more like a V on the front cover because you want to personalize it. Initials in grade 4 are a really big deal for the student. And then because some of the lessons in Norse mythology and the Kalevala and Beowulf, those ones can be drawn upon when you are doing your embroidery. So that's one of the projects that you might find in grade 4. I would encourage you to choose the correct kind of embroidery floss, which is also linked on the blog post. I've also linked the other kind of floss as well, because I tend to like this one for my projects more than the other one. So having a variety for your students might work out well, or at least if you're doing an example, it might work out well to have that. Although this one is, I feel, a little bit thicker, so it feels like the project goes by a little bit faster, a little bit easier. Grade 4 includes a lot of cross stitch. So I want to share with you one of the projects that I started and didn't finish, again, something that I learned from the Waldorf conference. I'm going to share with you the things not to do. Don't choose these colors. These are not the right colors to choose for the grade 4 students. Certainly you could if you wanted to. I was trying to do something earthy. Earthy colors aren't really a fourth grade thing to do. I would choose more primary colors or colors that are brighter. Yeah, not these ones. So the other thing that you will notice with a project, with the cross-stitch projects, is that usually, or even with the embroidery projects, usually they're going to be 4 things that you are using in some way: bags, a pencil case. And so what I learned is that you want there to be an indication, a movement with your artwork, with your cross-stitch, with your embroidery, that indicates what part of the the project is the opening. So in this case, the opening would be up here. If the lighter parts were up here, if we did something where it was light up here and dark down here, then maybe this would be like an eyeglass case where the opening would be up here. And then if it was a much larger piece, and maybe this is like a handbag or a bag for books, then, and this was the opening, you'd want the lighter portion to be up here, or the embroidery to sort of look like it was going in this direction. You want the artistry and the flow to be practical and beautiful and indicate what that item is maybe not used for, but where the opening of that item is. So this was meant to be a little pencil case, and so this would then be stitched with fabric that's similar. This is the project that my daughter started, and so this kind of muslin or cotton lining would also be used on this one. And then you could do a zipper or a snap, or we had learned how to use a measuring tape, a metal measuring tape, to make a little snappy opening, which was kind of a neat, unique way to do an opening. So this would be a project that would span many days or weeks or months even, because cross stitch is a very slow process. And I don't have the greatest example down here of the cross stitch just because there are multiple colors that are being used, but up here you have a better example of the way that you want the cross stitch to look, because you're going to be doing cross stitch in a way that where you come in and where you go out is going to be the same. Each stitch that you do is going to be the same, so that the back is going to give you two little railroad tracks. And that indicates that you have done a great job and that you haven't been sporadic or random, I should say, about your stitches. So you want your stitches to be the same all the way through with each stitch. Obviously, with a project like this, that's not going to happen when you're trying to intersperse other colors together to give you sort of an ombre effect. That was my attempt. You can see that I did not achieve that, and why these colors and also this design, while it was my attempt at doing the project, I did not accomplish the goals very well. So I have another one here to practice before I take this to my daughter, who's not in 4th grade, but I still want her to do this project anyway, because we did more embroidery at this stage versus cross stitch, and that was because I did not know how to do cross stitch. But now I want to share with you some alternatives to what you would typically find in the curriculum, because the curriculum is going to show you cross-stitch ideas that are more Eurocentric, and they're going to show you embroidery that's going to coordinate with the history or mythology units. So you have the Norse mythology, Beowulf, and Kalevala, and that's all Northern European. And so the cross-stitch and the embroidery is going to be reflective of those main lesson blocks. So I want to share with you some alternatives so that you can maybe do things that are more like from a different culture, or that maybe are more appropriate for you, your religion, or your location. So these are different embroidery kits that are from Palestine or by Palestinians. And this Tatriz kit, I haven't opened it yet, but there is hopefully going to be a video on this project and an unboxing, an official unboxing. So look out for that one. It will be in the playlist once it's posted. So what I've learned is that there are different regions within Palestine that have different types of embroidery, and each one has its own unique design or colors or different emblems. And this one's from the Ramallah region, and this one is a beginner level, but I would say beginner for adults. And while I did talk to the people who created this kit, they did say a child of 9 or 10 could do this. And I would say that they could, but with assistance. Like, you would need to supervise and maybe really help along the way until they got much better at it. but definitely beginner for an adult, and definitely children and teenagers can do this as well. And if you're working with younger children, because this kit includes finer embroidery thread and a smaller embroidery fabric, like this one's quite large, you can see, and I apologize, I do not remember the names for all the embroidery fabric, but there are different names depending on how many threads or how large it is. And this one is a really good size for the grade 4 student. This particular one is linked, as well as these kits, but this particular fabric is linked because it's the right one for grade 4. And so if you wanted to include some embroidery that was from a different culture, I encourage you to try out this kit. The Ramallah sampler, this Tatriz kit is from a different vendor. This one is actually a little bit easier in my opinion. And the fabric is still the smaller kind, if you can see the difference. But the design seemed, I liked the idea of being able to do a little bit of the different designs. So it's not going to have like an actual, say, I've seen ones that have like, say, a camel or a masjid or a Dome of the Rock. They'll have like different images. This one's going to teach you the different symbols or the different emblems, motifs. And I like this idea because then once you learn this, then you can decorate other things with whatever design you want based on this being somewhat of like a tutorial to teach you the different designs. It also comes with the embroidery floss. And if you notice, this embroidery floss is the kind that I would say an older student or an adult would use more so and more easily than this kind here. And this one does come with the hoop as well as the bag and the instruction guide. I think that this one would be really great for a grade 4 student with some help because it is based on the fabric that's a little bit smaller. You could consider doing the same motifs on the larger cross-stitch fabric. However, I would say that I would do this project and this project after some basics are learned, and those basics might be something like this. So this one, this is machine embroidered, and this was just, I mean, this is not made in Palestine or by Palestinians, but this is an example of a very traditional type of embroidery. This is machine embroidered, which is still considered embroidery, but it's not hand embroidered. There are differences, but I just want to point that out. And this is really beautiful, quite time consuming to make. And something like this was made by a Palestinian. And these are probably, let's see, actually, yeah, they are similar or the same as this motif right here. This one is a little different than what you might do in the 4th grade classroom, only because you can see that it's not lighter at one side where the opening is. This is an actual very solid design rather than an ombre look for the bag. But the reason why I like it and the reason why I'm sharing it with you is as an alternative to the cross stitch. If you wanted to do something that represented a different culture, this is the kind of thing that you would find, even if it doesn't match the objective of the Waldorf curriculum. It is another choice for you if you wanted to. And you can see that this one, while it was hand embroidered, I don't know about the rest. This looks like it's machine stitch. It wouldn't have been hand stitched, but the 4th grade student would hand stitch everything. This is their version of a twizzle. It looks like it's made with, they have them where you can kind of crank it and come out with like a rope like this. They also have the other kind that is foam, and it's circular, and you pull the different threads across and it starts to make this same kind of shape. And then it has the zipper. So this is another option for you for the handwork for grade 4. I only have one more thing to share with you, and that is something that you're going to find starting in kindergarten, maybe grade 1, and that is the Stockmar beeswax modeling beeswax. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is that if you did not have any clay, which I did share with one of the other videos for this grade year, then you might consider getting some of the wax, and not necessarily to make the projects that you would be making with the clay, but as another hand, something to keep your hands busy and to mold and to use. You certainly could use it still with your main lessons, but I do highly encourage the use of tactile materials, clay, dough, wax. It's so good for young kids, and a 4th grade student will still really enjoy using these kinds of materials. And the way that we've used them in the past is usually as something free for the children to do. It wasn't really usually tied to a main lesson block, or it was something to keep their hands busy as we were doing other projects. My only concern with the wax and with clay and with dough is that if you're not careful, you're going to find it in the carpet and on the tile and on the hardwood floors and everywhere, just because little pieces end up just getting everywhere. But I do encourage the use of it. My children really loved it over the years, and I have seen children construct little models or little animals that coordinate with their main lessons in some way or another, and this might be a nice activity to include with the man and animal unit if you wanted to do something that was more purposeful or more objective based. And otherwise, I would just say have it on hand for children's open-ended creativity. I hope that you're enjoying this series. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information, as well as links to the resources that I am using. You can find the link to the blog post down in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.